that brings us up to the current subject at hand, which is water, rainwater harvesting. So as you all know already, water is so precious and important. We need water for agriculture. We need it for domestic consumption. Without water, everything is difficult. When Hurricane Maria hit here a few years ago, everybody was a little bit disturbed or annoyed by the lack of electricity. There's a lot of inconveniences, not being able to run fans, fridges being out, etc. But there was nothing as so disturbing as having a lack of water. And that's one good reason to do rainwater harvesting. So anyways, this slide just got some statistics. Interesting if you didn't know this, but only 90% of all the water on the whole planet is salt water. Okay, and only less than 1% of water is found in the atmosphere and is available through rainwater. So it's a precious commodity on all levels. So we're going to be speaking about today active rainwater harvesting. So just to bring you up to speed on the lingo, the words, that the jargon in this field. Passive rainwater harvesting refers to systems that work in the ground. So that would include terraces, swales, berms, infiltration basins, infiltration ponds. That's passive rainwater harvesting. And today we're going to be focused on active rainwater harvesting, which is a term we use to talk about storing water in cisterns or tanks. So we're going to be using roofs, gutters, pipes to bring water into the tanks. And then those we can use for irrigation as an emergency backup reserve, or you could even set up a system where the rainwater could be your primary source of water for domestic use if you set up a pump and filtration system. So this is kind of the general idea of what we're talking about with rainwater harvesting. Real quick before we move on, this very important to point out, irrigation, I think for all of you that are interested in agriculture, I want to point out that rainwater harvesting is excellent for irrigation because it has no chlorine. Now, chlorine, as you know, is designed, it's a chemical that's designed to eliminate all bacteria, because when they put it in the water supply, they want to make sure that the water gets delivered to your household without any bacteria like E. coli and things that can make us sick. But that's a negative thing when you apply that to the soil, because in especially organic farming or ecological agriculture, we want to focus on promoting healthy populations of microorganisms in the soil. So a lot of the work we do with compost tea and having compost and not using herbicide is to have a healthy soil that's rich in microorganisms. That's going to bring so many benefits to the plants. It's going to make a healthier crop, and it's also going to make nutrient cycling occur in a way that's more efficient. It's going to help to ward off pests and disease. So having a healthy, biologically active soil is very important. And rainwater is an excellent source of irrigation because it's complementary with that. There's no chlorine in it. So there's nothing that's going to kill off those beneficial microorganisms. It also has a little bit of nitrogen and it has a high oxygen content. But especially that point about chlorine is very important. Whereas on the other hand, if you irrigate with city water, right, municipal water, that's going to have chlorine in it. And that can it's a fact, it will be killing a percentage of the microorganisms that are present in your soil. So I just want to point that out about irrigation. And of course, another big motivation in this to have rainwater harvesting tank, even if it's just a 55-gallon barrel, right? I really recommend that everybody at the end of this workshop go and get a 55-gallon barrel and hook it up. I'm going to teach you how to do that in just a few minutes, but get a 55-gallon barrel and hook it up so at least you have something that you can use as an emergency reserve. So if the water goes out, you can at least function somewhat normally. Okay, so now that's a little bit of introduction. Now we're going to study the general components of a system in this diagram here. And we're going to kind of work our way through some of these components. And then we're going to shift and start studying how to install a 55-gallon barrel, rainwater barrel. Okay, so let's start at the top. Catchment service or area of catchment. So that is the roof, right? Active rainwater harvesting requires some kind of roof. It doesn't have to be any particular roof. It could be any. It could be a metal roof, galvalume, concrete roof. It could even be a plastic tarp. You can even harvest rainwater off of a greenhouse, a high tunnel. So you do need a catchment area. So that's up top. And different catchment areas, you want to be aware of how to measure that and get a sense of what kind of material you're working with. Then we have some type of a gutter system. There's different kinds of gutters. We're going to talk about that. Next, moving down here, we can see the leaf diverter. This isn't necessary. This is a good thing to have when possible, but it's not required. Basically, a leaf diverter is a type of a screen. You can see that this pipe coming down doesn't connect directly into that. It is discharging the water just a couple inches above a slanted screen, a screen that has a slope on it. And so the idea is that some of the leaves and sticks and stuff that have ended up on the roof and got washed down with the rainwater, we want to separate those before they go into the tank. So leaf diverter collects some of the bigger items. Then below, you can see there's this thing here called a first flush system. First flush system, which is a really simple thing. We're going to teach you how to hook that up. It basically separates out some of the first gallons that come off of your roof that tends to be the dirtiest water. So let's just imagine it hasn't rained for about a week and maybe 2 weeks. And you got some birds that pooped on your roof. You got some leaves, maybe that polvo de Sahara, some of the dust from the Sahara Desert came and collected on your roof. You know, you've got some gunk on your roof. It starts raining today. Those first gallons of rainwater that hit the roof are going to tend to wash off. Excuse me. They're going to tend to wash off some of the gunk that's collected on the roof. So we want to try to separate that water into this first flush system before filling up our tank, because that's going to help a little bit to keep our tank clean. So it's still, of course, rainwater harvest. Rainwater is not potable. It's not, you can't drink it without taking it through extra filtration or boiling it. But at the very least, we want to try to keep it as clean as possible going to the tank. So the leaf diverter and the first flush system are two ways that we clean the water up a little bit before it gets into the tank. Okay, once the tank's full, at some point it's going to start overflowing, and we have to design for that. We have to create a place where that excess water can overflow. So here you can see in this larger tank here, there's an overflow pipe. And this overflow pipe comes down the side of the cistern. And in this sketch, you can see it's buried under the ground. You could do it above ground, but I recommend, if possible, to try to do a little trench and bury it underground so it doesn't break so easily. Somebody coming by with a wheelbarrow or hitting it, or a stick falls on it after a rainstorm or whatever. So here we've got it trenched, and it's discharging in an area where there's a little bit lower. If you have natural topography in your site, you can send it towards somewhere where it's dropping down slightly, or you can also dig out a basin. So this over here, this is an example of passive rainwater harvesting. So there it's discharging into this little basin. You can excavate or something. You can plant a fruit tree next to it, or some bananas. Bananas like extra water. Mangoes can handle, papayas can handle extra water. Bananas, you can put some of those crops around it, let that water discharge there, maybe put some large rocks or something to receive the impact, and you can have like a basin. Look up banana circles. You'll see some ideas on the internet there. So you could send this to a banana circle. If you Google that, you'll find something. Up top, there's a vent with a sieve. A sieve is like a screen. The whole tank, you gotta have screens everywhere. You don't want to ever have any way that critters can get into your tank. So up here where this vent is, we're gonna have a screen. Down here where the water is discharging into the filtration pond, again, we need a screen. Always gotta have everything screened. So this vent pipe, you'll see a little bit later, this isn't always necessary. Not all systems require a vent. Depends whether or not this pipe that's bringing the water in, if it's a sealed connection or if it's discharging it from above with a little bit of a gap. If it's a sealed system, then we're going to need a vent pipe up here to let the air pressure out. Otherwise, imagine you've got this empty cistern water's coming in and it's starting to occupy the space that was previously occupied by air. And if you don't have a way for that air to get pushed out easily, it starts to build up, the air starts getting compressed and it creates a resistance for the water pouring in. And we want that water to pour in easily and quickly. We want to get every drop we can. So if it's a sealed system, you're going to need to have a vent up top. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And at the bottom, of course, you got the faucet for distribution. That's where we're going to collect the water. That's where we're going to get the water and use it. So you can hook this up to an irrigation system, to a hose. You could fill up a bucket with it, etc. So this is kind of an overview of a system. Here's a diagram or a sketch for first flush. So as I mentioned, the first flush gets those first gallons of water, the dirty water that comes off of the roof when it first starts raining. So this is just a little sketch. I know there's a lot of words on here, but don't get confused. This is really simple. You got the roof. Let's start here on the slide 1 on the left. The roof comes down, goes in our gutter, and the first gallons go in this vertical section of pipe. Moving over here to the second, once that section is filled up, it spills over and overflows into the tank. And then the third step, later on, once it's stopped raining, you have to open up this valve down here at the bottom and drain out the water. So I'm going to share with you really quick. I'm going to shift here to a sketchbook, and I'm going to share with you, I'm going to do a quick sketch. It's not going to be necessarily pretty, but it'll get the idea across. I just want to do a little sketch about a couple details in that first flush system. Okay, here we are. So let's see, first flush. So we're coming off the roof in a gutter, some sort. It comes down. Okay, here's our tank over here. But instead of going directly into the tank, right? Instead of sending this directly towards the tank, okay, we want to first come straight down all the way to the ground level. And here at the ground level, we're going to install an elbow, a 90-degree elbow. That's not pretty, but hopefully you get the idea. That's a 90-degree elbow. And then here, we're going to put either a threaded cap that can be loosened, or we're going to put off a shutoff valve. So a shutoff valve is one of these parts here that looks like this. Some of you may have seen this before. It's just a little piece here with the shutoff valve. You turn in one direction, it closes. Turn in the other direction, it opens and lets the water out. So you can also down here put a shutoff valve, which is going to give you the option of opening it up and draining out all that water. Okay, so here, this elbow, here we're going to do a T, and this T's got to be placed in a certain direction. You want to get a T that looks just like this here. I want to get a T that looks just like that. Okay. Let me see here real quick. Okay. This is important. So these T's, they come in different styles, but you want one that's got that little bit of a curve, and you want the curve to go in this direction. Okay. Then you put in a horizontal section of pipe, and then you drop into your cistern, either a sealed connection or a drop in with a screen above it. Okay. So sorry, I know that's not a very pretty sketch, but I just wrote really key points is down here. Okay, this shutoff valve, and then this T has to be installed in that particular direction. That's a really important little detail. So the first gallons, just to kind of do it again, first gallons start to fill up this vertical section of pipe. Okay, and then once this has reached capacity and that's full, then all the water that comes in from then, it starts, you know, this little area here, it's all kind of mixing around, but most of the sediments and most of the gunk is all starts to settle down here in the bottom. This is where you get all the gunky stuff. And then this, then this fills up here and the water starts to flow directly into your tank. Okay, so this is called the first flush. This isn't something you have to buy. This is just PVC pipe. It should be 2 or 3 inches. If it's a little bit of a larger system, it should be even up to 4 for like a once we did a greenhouse, a 70 by 30-foot long greenhouse, and we used 4-inch pipe. That was a big catchment area. But for a house, let's say, 1,500 square feet, 3-inch pipe is going to be fine. If you're working with a very small structure, like let's say 15 by 20 feet or 15 by 40 feet, you could probably get away with a 2-inch pipe. Okay, so this is the first flush system. Again, it's not something you have to buy. It's something you can just build with PVC parts. You got a 90-degree elbow down here. You've got the shutoff valve down here, and you've got a T here. And that's it. It's a pretty simple setup. Now, it is going to have a lot of weight, so you're going to want to make sure that you secure this to the wall somehow in a couple places. If you want to get extra catchment area, I mean, if you've got a big roof area and water's coming off pretty dirty, you can increase the size of this. And the way you do that is you're going to run down here a horizontal section of pipe. Horizontal section of pipe. And then down here, we're going to install that shutoff valve. So this gives you even more capacity. So basically, you're just extending the entire length of the tube. So now all this section of tube has to get filled up also. So you can kind of run that along the side of a building, the base of a building, or you can put underground even. Just gives you a little bit more capacity in the first flush. Maybe this is a good section just to pause for a minute and see if anybody's got any questions so far. Okay, Christina's got a question here. She says, where would you place a screen in the first flush system to keep critters from hanging out in the sediment catch section that comes down from the gutter? Okay, good question, Christina. So yeah, basically down here, the base of this, the bottom of this is going to have a shutoff valve, and this is going to be sealed. You're going to keep that closed at all times. So that ends up being a sealed portion. Or if you don't do the shutoff valve, you can do the threaded cap. So that's also going to be closed off. The other thing you can do is up here at the top, this inlet here where the pipe is coming out of your structure, you can install a screen up here. Okay? Yeah,
that's what she mentioned. She says critters from the roof.
Critters from the roof. Yeah, so you can install screens up there. Well, and that's another benefit though of inserting the leaf diverter, is that if we cut in here somewhere and we add a leaf diverter, now we've got a screen. So that's another advantage of the leaf diverter. So you can do both. You can do a screen up here and on the roof, or you can do a screen there. And good question. I appreciate that question because we should always be thinking, how am I going to keep the critters out of here? You always got to be thinking about critters. Critters. Okay. Any other quick questions before we continue?
Anyone that has a question, please shoot them out through the question and answer section. I don't know, maybe give it 30 seconds or so. Some people might be typing. We will have more opportunities moving forward, but if anyone has a question so far, feel free to share them. Anyone? People got it.
All right.
With the
okay, well, we'll continue. I think a lot of stuff's going to keep getting more clear as we go too.
Awesome.
Okay, so we've got a basic intro to a lot of the components. So just point out there's different kinds of roofs. You want to just identify what kind of roof am I working with. You want to walk around on the roof, look at it. Is it really filthy? Is it not so clean? It's often a good idea before you install a rainwater harvesting tank to clean the roof. Get up there with a pressure washer, clean it. If you've got a concrete roof and you're thinking about sealing it, maybe get that project out of the way first before you hook up the rainwater tank. Otherwise, you can always, flush the tank, so that's not a big deal. Well, you just want to study which kind of roof you have. And different kinds of roofs give you different kinds of options for how to set up your gutter system. Because from the roof, next thing to hook up is a gutter. All right, so let's look at gutters a little bit. Here's a sink roof. So that's a corrugated metal, it kind of like does the wave shape. This is a zinc roof, and here we've got a group of workshop participants. They're getting trained to participate in our Cosecha Acuática program, and they're also combining their work with social impact. So this is a really cool project we did in 2018 and 2019. We're training people to become professional rainwater harvesting installers, and they were doing work on at-risk populations and doing the systems for free for the owners of the household. Anyways, here you can see they're installing a 3-inch pipe that they've cut. Here you can see a different angle. This is a different household, but this is a long 3-inch pipe that's been joined together. It's glued. These come in 10-foot sections. And at the far end down here, there's a cap, a threaded cap that you can take off to clean it. Otherwise, it seals, it keeps that end sealed. All the water collects inside this and has a gentle slope bringing all the water to this corner here. Now that 3-inch pipe, we've cut it the length of it. You can see here this, this line here, you mark it with a nice straight line. You can use different kinds of tools to cut that, like a jigsaw, maybe a grinder, handsaw. Cut that pipe the length of it, and then you spread it open, kind of like Pac-Man biting onto the roof, okay? And there's, you wanna try to get it where most of the pipe is below the roof. And then you're gonna wanna fasten that with a couple screws. So you can pass a screw through the plastic and take it down into the metal roofing. Just gonna do a quick sketch of a couple of these details. Let's go back to sketchboard here for a second. So this option is attractive because it's pretty cheap. This is one of the, I think this is the cheapest option. It requires more skill than some of the other gutters. Like when you purchase a gutter that's just ready to go, like a 3 or 5 inch plastic or metal gutter, it doesn't require quite as much skill to install. But this is attractive because it's cheap. So we've got this, let's see, we got our roof. Let me switch to block actually. So we got our roof coming down here, and it's gonna have some kind of a structural member below it, maybe a 2x6 or something. And we're gonna hook onto that. Let's go to red here. So we've got our 3-inch PVC pipe. We've cut it the entire length, and now we're gonna fasten it like this. We're gonna open it up like Pac-Man biting onto that. And we're gonna get most of the pipe down here below because we wanna leave space so that it can collect some water inside the pipe. Okay, and then the screw, we're gonna put the screw up here on the top, biting that. So here, you know, in my sketch, it's, let's do that again. In my sketch, that was kind of a little bit round, but it's gonna be a little bit more like this, kind of flat, parallel with the roof, and then it's gonna kind of round down because when we put that screw in it right here, it's gonna really kind of pinch that section of the PVC flattened out. It's gonna flatten it and kind of pinch it down. And often that screw is just enough. If you feel like it needs a little bit more, or if it ever gives you trouble, the other thing you can do is to this screw here, you can attach a thin metal wire and you can wrap this underneath and bring it up here and tie it off with some kind of a screw or fastener. So that's another way to give it a little bit more support and keep it in position. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Now, if we look at a roof, this is a little, I know this is a little sloppy, forgive me. If we look at the roof this way, okay. Look at the roof this way. Now, you're gonna wanna first measure the slope and see, comparing this point to this point, is it level or is there a natural slope? If you see that the roof is naturally sloping in one direction, then you're gonna wanna make sure to install the gutter and your tank down here, okay? If you find out that it's pretty flat, then you can kind of do it either way. You could put your tank on the left or the right side. Okay, so let's say that we decided this roof's got a little bit of a slope down this way. We're gonna put our tank down here. And so this end here of the, again, this is 3-inch PVC pipe. We open it up, we do our Pac-Man trick. It's fastened onto here with our screws in different spots, right? It's pinched down, maybe we did a couple of metal wires, wrapped it underneath it to fasten it down. And on this end here, we're gonna put something to seal it off. So this is a good place to do a cap, a threaded cap. Okay, so first we'll do a female adapter and then we're gonna thread in a cap there. That way you can periodically open this up and stick a hose in there or a stick and flush it out and clean this out. Okay. And down here, we're going to have a 90-degree angle joint connecting it and dropping it down towards the tank. So when you make those cuts, another little trick here is that when you make the cuts on the pipe, you know, we've got it opened up like Pac-Man here. That's good for this whole section where it's on the roof. But at the very end here, you need at least 4 to 6 inches where it's not cut. Okay, so let's imagine this pipe here. Sorry, let's get a little weird. You need 4 to 6 inches where it's not cut because this needs to glue onto an entire piece of PVC. So on either end here, you're going to take a little section of the pipe and you're going to take the cut, you bring it along, and then stop and leave that 4 inches. Hopefully that makes sense. Another little trick, say this roof is more than 20 feet, more than 10 feet, and you're going to have to join together multiple pipes. First, glue them together and then cut them as a team. Cut them once they're joined, because if you cut them first, it's a little bit harder to bring them together and glue them. So I hope that's clear. Again, this is this 3-inch PVC pipe cut open. It's got its pros and cons. One of the pros is that it's pretty cheap. It's easy to fix, you know, if things go wrong. One of the cons, it takes a little bit of skill, and it's a little bit difficult to clean. It's hard to kind of have access to it. And again, this is only an option that we consider for a zinc roof or a corrugated metal roof. Okay. Back we go to the slides. Okay, well, this is just pointing out that sometimes you have awkward spaces and you have to get a little creative, right? So here we've got another kind of gutter, the square 4-inch plastic gutter, and we had to get a little creative where we brought it in. You can see here, let's see if I zoom in a little bit. You can see here that it's important to support those pipes that are carrying water. Here's another option. So I mentioned metal wire. Here's also a type of a hanger. This is what people use sometimes to hang electrical conduits or PVC pipes. And you just cut it here and screw it in somehow. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, here's another type of roof. So especially if you have the corrugated roof that has the different shape, the one that kind of goes square and goes up and goes back down. Here in Puerto Rico, we call it galvalum. I'm not sure how you call it in the Bahamas or the Virgin Islands, but here we call it galvalum. It's different. It's a type of corrugated metal roof, but it has kind of 4 to 6 inches in between each little mountain. For that type of roof, it's usually better to purchase one of these square gutters. They come in plastic or metal. You can buy hangers that are ready to go, or you can fabricate your own hangers if you want to be creative and use that metal wire I just showed you. And those actually rest just below the roofing, like you can see here. Okay, so of course metal is probably going to be the most durable and longest lasting. They can come painted, or you can get plastic. So this is a very good option. It's a little bit more expensive than the 3-inch PVC, but it's a very good option. And okay, so we talked about different kinds of metal roofs. Here we've got a concrete roof. Here in Puerto Rico, these are very common. You have the concrete roof with usually it's a 1.5 or 2-inch pipe that's sticking out up top that spits the rainwater down the ground, and you can just come right in and connect to that pretty easily. And here again, you're going to see this type of a clamp that we're using to fasten it onto the concrete. You can also see down here below, because those pipes, once they get filled up with water, they're going to be pretty heavy. And if you're having a storm, they're heavy, they're filled with water, and the wind's blowing. You know, you don't want those to be moving around and break something or fall off. So it's good to fasten those to things. And here you can see on this concrete roof, it's often a pattern. We're going to be trying to get back to the wall as quickly as we can. The wall is a good place to attach your pipe. You don't want a lot of pipe just hanging out in the air where it can get broken. So this is a thing that we commonly do, is we take it off the roof, and if there's an overhang, we bring it back to the wall as quickly as possible. So you can do that with a 90-degree angle, or you can use two 45-degree angles, get it back to the wall and attach it there. Then it comes down. Here we've got our first flush. There's that little detail I pointed out. You see the curve. So these come with this curve. You want to think the water, what is the water going to do? First, it's going to go in the bottom of the pipe, fill it up. And then once it's full, you want it to be making this curve gently. If the curve's going the other way around, if it goes up, then you're going to be drawing water directly into your tank. Whereas we want to send it down into the first flush first. Okay, so that little detail is important. Okay, and then that's their first flush tee. And then just zooming back, you can see from there, it comes over this arm and drops into the tank. And that's the first flush. Okay, so there we've learned about different kinds of roofs and gutters. Okay, here's another couple options with concrete roofs. Let's zoom in here a little bit more so you can see some of these details. Okay, here we've got a big 3-inch pipe comes off the roof. Again, like I pointed out, we bring it over to a column or to a wall where we can fasten it. Here you can see it's fastened to this column. Comes down, we've got the first flush. We've got another fastener just below that T to help support it. And then the arm comes over, and in this case, it's dropping into the tank. It's not directly going into the tank. It's just a couple inches above with a screen there. And that screen's also working as a filter. And this tank will not require vent because it's got that gap there. When this pipe goes directly and connects directly into the tank in a sealed manner, that's when you need that vent pipe. Okay, so we're just seeing, right now we're just seeing different details of how the pipe connects to the roof here. You can see another option here. This is a 2-inch pipe coming out of the wall, another concrete roof here. Okay. Okay. All right, that's kind of overview of the different components. Now, time to dig in and highlight different types of cisterns and how to install them. So first, let's go for the 55-gallon tank. All right, this is a low budget option. This is the one, if you don't have any rainwater harvesting in your house or in your farm, I recommend go and do a 55-gallon barrel right away. Go buy one. Don't wait until they're on sale. Just get one right away. Who cares? Like what? If you get them for $20, good deal, wonderful. If you have to pay another $10 or $20, let's say you get a bad deal and you have to pay a little bit more. I'm not saying waste money, but water is so important. Go get one of these tanks right away. They're not expensive. They're easy to hook up. And this is something, it's a good way to get started, learn the principles, and you get some emergency water on reserve right away. Quick and cheap, simple, and it can also be used as for irrigation, especially a nice small little garden, right? That's not going to be enough for a whole farm, of course, but for a nice little vegetable garden, for some compost, it's perfect. Okay, so this, highly recommend it. We're going to study this in detail so all of you know how to build this. Simple. Okay, first, at the top of the barrel, we're going to cut it open. You can use a jigsaw or even a handsaw of some sort. Mark it, cut it open. I recommend don't cut the entire top of the barrel, but neither should you do a really small hole. You want to make sure the water is, when it's gushing in, it can get in there. So this is, in this case, we did about half the tank. That's a pretty good option, or you could do a little bit less. You could do maybe a third of the tank, or you could do a big hole in the center, maybe a 12-inch wide hole. Then you're going to clean it up a little bit after you make a cut. It leaves little pieces of plastic. Get a knife or some sandpaper, clean that up, and then you're going to get some kind of a shade cloth or screen material and layer it. Do 2 or 3, even 4 layers, and then staple it down. If you don't have a staple gun, you can also stretch this. You'll use more cloth this way, but you could also stretch it over the lip of the barrel and then run some kind of a metal wire or a string or something and tighten it down. That's another way that you could do that if you don't have a staple gun. Okay, it's important to point out that there's, especially if any of you are new to working with PVC, there's 2 main common types of pipes that you are going to encounter. There's what in Puerto Rico we call them sanitarios, tubos sanitarios. It's very thin-walled. This pipe, let's say this is 2 or 3 inches, you can take in your hand and squeeze it and it'll deflect, it'll flatten. So this is a cheaper pipe and the walls are very thin. It's like a thin gauge. This other pipe, Schedule 40 is thicker walled. It's kind of like a bigger gauge, and you can't flatten it or squeeze it. It's much more durable. If something hits it, like let's say in a windstorm, a branch smacks into it or something like that, it's not as likely to crack or break as the thin-walled sanitary tube. Okay, so important and they each have their own place. When we make a homemade gutter system, the sketch we were looking at, when you draw the line and you cut it open, you do a Pac-Man, and you bite onto the metal roofing. That's got to be with the sanitary, the thin pipe, because that's the only pipe that's going to stretch and open up like that. So a 3-inch sanitary pipe, that thin pipe is what you'll use for the gutter. I would recommend for anything else, for all these other connections down here at the bottom, the gutters coming in from up top, all this pipe here, all those pipes, I personally would recommend just do Schedule 40. It's thicker, it's going to be a little bit more expensive, but you're going to have something that's going to be more durable and it's less likely to crack on you when you really need it. If a storm comes through or hurricane or something, you want to make sure that afterwards your pipe didn't just crack. You want to make sure that it's still serving and functioning. And if you use a thicker gauge pipe, got a better odds of that happening. Okay, so that's a little detail important to point out. So I would recommend always use Schedule 40, except for our Pac-Man gutter. Okay, if you've never cut a PVC pipe, just point out there's different ways. It takes a little practice, but it's not a big deal. Most common is you get one of these hand saws, cut through. Tendency is it tends to kind of go a little bit curved. So if you want to do a really good job and be careful, you can always mark it with a Sharpie or a pencil. And then instead of just cutting straight through from top to bottom, you can start your cut and then rotate the pipe around and kind of score everything if you want to get a really clean cut. There's also this tool here that comes. This is convenient for especially small pipes like 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch pipe you can cut through. This, you're not really going to use this to cut, 2 or 3 inch pipes like for the gutters and stuff. But if you've got one of these around, use them. It's not a bad option. For some of the larger tubes, especially 3-inch or 4-inch pipes, Schedule 40, not required, but professional operation, you often have power tools. So you've got here the option of the grinder. This is a little bit crude, but it gets the job done. That's an option. You want to use a dust mask, use glasses. It's going to kick up a bunch of powder, some gnarly PVC powder that you don't really want to breathe. Here's another option. This is a skill saw. Let me zoom in here a little bit so you can see that better. So that's another option there that's really efficient for cutting 3 or 4-inch pipes. Cuts right through them. So that's not necessary. That's only necessary if you're like for our Cosecha Aquatica business and service project, we are installing dozens of systems every year. We're making, a few hundred cuts. Starts to add up, and spending, $150 on a tool, $100 on a tool, totally feels worth it. But if you're just doing this once, don't feel like you got to go buy a tool just for that. Just take your time and cut it by hand. Okay. This is something that's going to come up in all of the projects that you do. This is just kind of like learning some basic PVC vocabulary and just kind of getting to know things. You've got, often you'll have these pieces here. You've got the female threaded adapter and you've got a male threaded adapter. So this type of connection happens sometimes. The threaded cap that I was mentioning earlier, like at the base of a first flush system, you can have a threaded PVC cap that will thread into that. That would be basically you'd have a female threaded adapter glued on to your pipe, your 3-inch pipe. And then there's another part, it's not pictured here, but it has basically, it's like a cap with the male threads, and you would just screw that in, and it's a way of sealing this and opening it back up. Anyways, just want to point this out. This is like a little vocabulary or just kind of learning basic PVC skills. Here's another little important detail. Teflon tape, this product here, is something that you use instead of glue when you're threading pieces together. So anytime you do a glued, just a pipe with an adapter, you're always going to use glue, PVC glue. It doesn't really matter a whole lot if you use the blue or the clear. I usually go with the clear heavy duty glue. But if you're threading a part into another part, especially like here, you see there's this bronze piece that's going to thread in. We're going to want to use Teflon tape for that. Not a whole lot of difference. A little difference, like this pink one here. Maybe you've got this in the Bahamas or Virgin Islands. I like this one. It's a little bit wider and thicker than some of the white stuff that you find around. But it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But it is important to thread that in the right direction. So you want to take the threaded piece, point it at your face, or point it towards you, right? And then think like a clockwise. So that's the direction that you're going to want to take the tape. Why does that matter? Because when you put it inside the female adapter and you start screwing it in, it's going to have pressure and resistance. And if it's going in the right direction, that's going to be just pushing the tape in the direction that it was already going. If you put the tape on in the incorrect direction, that pressure is going to tend to pull the Teflon tape back. And when it pulls it back, it's going to start stuffing and accumulating in like a little ball, or it's going to make like a little Teflon burrito inside of there, and you're going to have a leak. So that's not good. So it's important to get it in the right direction, and 3 layers is sufficient. Check that out. Now you can YouTube things like this now. I've actually spent about 3 hours once watching YouTube videos on how to Teflon correctly because I was having trouble. Like I was working with this big pressurized system, and maybe like 2 or 3 out of every 10 that I was putting together were leaking. I was like, what is going on? I want to get these right. I want to get 10 out of 10, or at least give me 9 out of 10. So I went to YouTube University for a while, and I actually watched some videos on how to do Teflon tape. There's a little detail, and then now I can usually get 10 out of 10 right. It's a little art. Everything's got an art, and that's something cool too that I want to point out is that anything you do, it's just let's bring 100% to it. Whatever we're doing, let's not do sloppy work. Let's do it right. Let's do it right. Okay, now going back to the barrel. Other little detail. We're going to insert our outlet where we're going to get the water. We're going to put that 2, maybe 3 inches above the base. We don't want to screw it down on the very, very bottom of the barrel. Advantage to that is that the sediments are going to tend to accumulate on the bottom. And when you raise that up a couple inches, you can avoid sucking out a lot of that dirtier water that'll stay on the bottom. Now, of course, if you're really in a pinch, you can always get it out. You can just tip the barrel if it's empty. You can clean it and flush it periodically. So that's a little detail. And you're going to want to use this tool called a hole saw to drill this hole here. And let's study a few things about this that make it more efficient. This is a very particular design that I really want you to try to do it just like that. So it starts with a uniseal. Uniseal is an economic, it's a cheap, and it's a trustworthy solution for connecting PVC pipe to a barrel or to a tank or to a bucket, especially things that are round. But this is really only works for systems that are gravity fed. So we don't use uniseals in pressurized systems, right? So imagine that pressurized means you have a pump, and it's pushing the water through. Then that kind of water pressure could cause a leak. But if you're just dealing with gravity-fed systems, simple gravity-fed systems like what we have here in this barrel, the uniseal is perfect. So you're going to drill this hole, and this little rubber gasket, you stick it right there in the hole. And then you're going to add a little bit of oil and stick the pipe into it, just like that. And it goes in, and the pressure that's created when the pipe, they're fitted at just the right size where the pipe squeezes in and it kind of expands and pushes up against the rubber gasket that creates a pretty good seal. I can't find these anywhere in the local hardware stores. I don't know if you'll be able to find them where you live. If not, this might be one of those kinds of things you just have to order off the internet. They're really easy to find on the internet. They're cheap, $1.50, $2, $3, depending on the size. And you're going to want to look for the size here, 3/4 inch. For example, in this rainwater harvesting tank or barrel, we're using a 3/4 inch PVC pipe. So we purchased a Uniseal that's 3/4 inch. Now, when you go to drill the hole, you're not going to drill a hole that's 3/4 inch. It's going to be a different size. So don't drill that hole yet until you have the Uniseal in your hand, and then you're going to find a drill bit, or a hole saw that's the same size as the interior part of the Uniseal, the part that's going to go into the tank. Drill it out, use a knife or sandpaper and clean up that edge a little bit. Stick the Uniseal in there, a little bit of oil, and then you're going to take a PVC pipe and poke it in. It should go, 2-3 inches inside the tank and have a few inches sticking out. And then after that, you're going to hook on this llave de paso, that's how we call it in Puerto Rico, this shutoff valve. You want to use a ball valve. This, you can open it up. If you pick up one of these ball valves, you put them in the open position, hold it up and look through it, and you're going to be able to see straight through there. It'll keep the interior diameter of the pipe consistent. So that's really important, because we don't want to reduce the diameter of the pipe in one of these gravity fed systems, because that's going to reduce the water flow. Okay, if we reduce that diameter, then the water is going to come out more slowly. So that's one of the big reasons we recommend this shutoff valve, ball valve, because it's going to let the water flow through really quickly. And then after that, we're just going to do a 90-degree coupling. This happened to be one that's stuck inside of the ball valve. That's not necessary. You can also just have a little section of pipe and have one that goes over it. So this is the basic outlet. Uniseal, little piece of pipe sticking into the tank, ball valve, 90-degree union pointing down, ready to go. You're going to get an amazing flow. This, on the other hand, this is very common. People will get this. They'll put a little silicone in there, screw it in, or just glue it. What happens? Well, they tend to leak, especially if you bang into this ever. Somebody bumps it with a wheelbarrow, or they bump it with a bucket, it starts leaking. Also, this type of hose bib has a low flow rate. This is good for a pressurized system, right? You want to come and tie a hose on there, and a pressurized system works great. But if you put this next to this other system here, and you start filling up a bucket at the same time, it's noteworthy that the speed, you can fill up a 5-gallon bucket in a matter of a second, 2 seconds with this. Whereas on the other hand, this type of a hose valve in a gravity fed system has a very slow flow rate. So you just end up sitting around waiting for the bucket to get filled up. So don't recommend this. If you have to go now, at least if you got this little information, if you know how to hook up the rainwater barrel, that's when. I'm going to share more cool stuff with you. But if you just got that and you went and hooked up a 55-gallon barrel, that's going to be huge. Start there. Another thing I can point out is that it's raised up on bricks. We usually decide a height that'll bring it up at least high enough to get a 5-gallon bucket below it, or a watering can. Okay, so that's important. You can see here on the left, this system does not have a first flush. This is just quick and dirty. All right, this is just a quick, cheap system. We just collected the rainwater, we dropped it straight down on top of the barrel. There's a little screen there. That's kind of the only screening and filtration that's happening. 3 levels of bricks, and we're ready to go. Okay, so this is now important. You can also see here in this that this tank, we've got the hose valve. We didn't know any better yet. Then we started realizing, oh my gosh, it's so much quicker with this one over here, with this shutoff valve. The other thing you can see here is this strap around it, holding the tank up against the wall. If you can do that, that's a great idea. Some kind of a strap, a rope, a tension cable, anything that'll keep that tank a little bit more secure in case you ever get a little earthquake or something. Hopefully it's not going to topple over and hurt somebody. So that's an important little detail there. This is another cool option. Here in this house, we had 2 barrels available. And so you can see we have a brick platform. The two barrels are sitting on there together. Okay, the pipe comes down. You can see we've brought it over to the wall immediately. We've got some metal brackets fastening it to the wall. Comes down, we've got our first flush system. We've got the T going in the right direction, comes over, drops into the tank. We've got this cut open with a screen, 2 or 3 layers of screen. We've got the tank secured with the cable here. We've got a sticker on it, a note. That's the important thing if you can. Slap a note on that thing. Danger, not potable water. You don't want people coming up and drinking out of your rainwater barrel and get sick. Okay, but something cool I want to point out here is that these barrels are filling up and draining together. I'm going to do a little sketch really quick so you see how we do it. It's simple technology, but it works really well. Okay, let's see this. So I'm assuming there's still people on the other end there. I'm talking at a screen, but I'm assuming there's real people on the other end of that screen. Hopefully some of you are finding this useful. Okay, here we've got a barrel. And I think Pamela, after this section on 55-gallon barrels, it'll be a good moment to take a pause and ask questions before we move to the bigger tanks.
Absolutely. So you heard our facilitator. Feel free to share all of those fabulous questions via the question and answer. We had a comment. Someone said, this presentation makes me very thirsty.
Oh, me too.
So go ahead, guys. So share all of the questions you have so far, because it's only going to get a little bit more complex. So take your time to digest all of this amazing information we've been having so far.
Okay, so here we've got 2 barrels. Okay, they're on a, oh gosh, that was a little crooked. They're here on these bricks. We got a couple rows of bricks. You know, with bricks, it's worth it. There's things you can do to make this brick stand a little bit more safe or stable. Of course, you can build a whole concrete base if you want with poured concrete or rebar or something. We often will just do a quick version where we just stack the bricks. But if, spend a little extra money, get a few extra bricks, and make sure you've got a nice, wide, stable base. Sometimes we kind of rush through, or we wanted to save a few dollars and made it something and it looks solid, and a year goes by, 2 years go by, and I keep looking and I'm thinking, that thing needs more bricks. It just doesn't feel stable. So yeah, just good to make sure you've got a nice, stable base. You can also flip the bricks standing up like they would go on a wall, and you can drive a rebar pin through them into the ground, right through them. You can pour in some gravel, or, there's a quick little options you can do without having to pour concrete. Okay, so here we've got these 2 barrels side by side, and water is only going into one, but we want them to work in parallel. We want them to work together. So what we're going to do is down here, about 2 to 3 inches from the base, we're going to drill a hole, and we're going to install a uniseal. And then directly opposite to it, at the exact same height, we're going to install another uniseal. And then we're just going to put, it's really simple, a little piece of pipe. This could be 3/4 inch PVC, I think would be a good option. Schedule 40, right? And that's going to just stick a couple inches into the tank. And that's it. And then now what we can do is over here, we're going to install another uniseal 2 to 3 inches above the bottom of the tank with a little section of straight pipe. Then we're going to add our shutoff valve. Then we're going to do our 90-degree coupling pointing down, and we're ready to go. So what we've got is it's kind of like 2 tanks for almost like a discount, because We've only got one outlet. We only did this rig here once rather than both tanks. We only did the screen thing once. We've got one pipe going in. So we're saving some materials and some money here, having the barrels work together as a team. And what happens is the water goes into this tank. Let's say they're empty. We get our first rain, water starts to fill up the bottom of this tank. This one hasn't got any water yet. Fills up, fills up. Once it gets to this level, then it's going to start pouring water into here. And this starts filling up, and then this is filling up, and then this one fills up higher, and then this one's filling up higher. And eventually they're going to even out. Eventually you're going to get to the point where they're both full, because this water is going to be getting passed through the inside of the pipe. Then when you come here to use this water, let's say we've got a bucket here or a watering can set up here, it's going to be drawing water out of both tanks. So they fill and they empty together as a team, and as a team together. So that's just a little trick. And this same thing here, you can expand this over time. So say you've got a nice long run next to your house and you've got some space and you start off with one barrel or two barrels, and later on you get a little bit more money, you can come in and add some more barrels. And you just keep adding bricks, and you keep connecting them. Now, if you do that, first, when you come to drill this hole in here, all the water is going to dump out. So, you're going to have to drain all the tanks to expand it. But you could do that. You could drain these tanks. You come along, you put another tank here. Or you come in, you do two more tanks. And you could connect them all together. Another thing people do sometimes is that this outlet, rather than putting it on the same one where the water's coming in, they'll put it down here on the last one. And then this water, they say, is a little bit cleaner because it's kind of been going through this settling phase. You get more sediments in this first tank. This kind of ends up being the dirtiest one. This one's a little cleaner, and this one ends up being the cleanest tank. So that's doing it in series. Anyways, hope you find that's useful. Really recommend these barrels and the uniseals. Uniseals are cheap and easy. You can knock into them and they don't break. You can actually take a pipe and a uniseal and you can wiggle around and knock onto it and it won't start leaking. Pretty cool. All right, I'm gonna take a pause, drink some water. Pamela, want to tell a joke or ask a question? What's up?
Pamela, you're on mute.
Sorry, I apologize. At this point, we have a couple of open comments. Mostly, someone is interested in visiting you all, Owen, so that might be something we can set up later. I can share the information on Plenitud, Ricky, if you're listening to us, so you can reach out and see if you can visit them over there at Las Marias. We have another comment about Donald. He's sharing that for the uniseal lubrication, you should specify vegetable oil, not motor oil. Also good is water-based KY lubricant. So he offered some suggestions there as well.
Nice. Donald, I totally agree with you. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. You definitely do not want to use motor oil. That's right. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. You want to use a little cooking oil, like some vegetable oil or coconut oil. Yeah, you don't want to use WD-40 or motor oil, just a little cooking oil. Or I've never used KY lubricant, but I guess that would probably work too. Sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting suggestion.
Yeah.
So we don't have any more open questions. I don't know if our participants are being shy today, but anyone, please feel free to share any questions you have in regards to what Owen has shared with us so far. If not, we can continue on. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to share them. I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to ask our participants, Owen, so we can maybe get them going with questions or sharing some of their experiences, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think it would be nice to see. Does anybody have a rain barrel hooked up, or has anybody had experience connecting a rainwater barrel?
That might be a good
Guess
one.
another related question is: are those available? Like, have you guys see those around? I mean, they're pretty ubiquitous. They seem to be all over the world. But have you seen those in the Bahamas, in the Virgin Islands?
So there we have Christina. She's answering that yes. I don't know to which of those questions, Christina. So if you want to, let me actually try and open the chat. It might be a little bit more direct. But in any case, if you want to also use the question and answer, feel free to do that. Okay, so I have opened up the chat so participants will be able to share it also via the chat, any comments that they have.
Cool. Right.
Alrighty. So let's see what we got.
Okay. Maria asked a question here. Did you specify the size to drill the holes? No, Maria, I did not. It's going to vary. I actually don't have memorized for, say you're using a 1/2 inch uniseal or a 3/4 inch uniseal. I don't have memorized what size that is. I've got a little box of different drill bits, and I'll usually just kind of hold them up side by side until I find the one that works out. I'll be placing one next to another, and when they kind of line up, then it's good. But it's just important. It is important. I can specify that the uniseal, whatever, when you buy it and it says 3/4 inch uniseal, that size, 3/4 inch, is the size of the pipe that's going to go into it. So you're going to be using a 3/4 inch PVC pipe. But the hole itself is going to be a little bit bigger because there's rubber that goes around that pipe. So it's going to be a little bit bigger, but I don't actually have that memorized.
Ooh, just have a couple questions rolling in. We have Munoz asking us, what will be the average size roof recommended for, say, a 200-gallon tank if you plan to build a standalone structure? It's a good question.
So a standalone structure, like you would be building a roof just to collect the rainwater? Jay Munoz, was that the idea? You'd be building a roof just to create a catchment surface? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's formulas and stuff, but the basic idea is I could give you a rough estimate. I'd say, 10 by 10 foot really is going to be fine. 10 by 20 foot would be plenty big enough. I mean, I hope that you'd be using the roof for something else, right? I mean, maybe having a catchment surface area would be one of your main motivations, but hopefully you'd also find some other use out of the structure, right? Like you'd be setting up like a gazebo or an area to rest or sit outside or an outdoor kitchen or something. Yeah, usually what I've found is that tanks tend to fill up pretty quickly. The only time that the bigger catchment area really makes a difference is when it's just a sprinkle. If you just have a little sprinkle, then you're going to notice, okay, a big roof is going to fill up a tank much more quickly. But if you get even just a decent downpour for half an hour, you're going to fill up pretty much any of your tanks. You're going to fill up all your tanks. You could fill up a 200-gallon tank in, one good half an hour rain, good rain, with a 10 by 10 foot roof or 10 by 15 foot roof. Doesn't take a lot of space. The main thing I've kind of run into with catchment and rainwater tanks is that the biggest limiting factor is how big is your tank? Because at least here in Puerto Rico, when it's raining frequently, the tanks are always full and you're good to go. But as soon as you go into a time period where you have several weeks or multiple months without rain, then how big is your battery bank? How big is your reserve? Do you have a 200-gallon tank, a 1,000-gallon tank, a 55-gallon barrel? How much are you consuming? Are you just using it as like an emergency reserve, or are you using it as like a primary irrigation source, or is it your primary water source in the house? But really, for me, that's what I found is that the biggest limitation is tank size. When it's raining often, you're good to go. You're always going to have enough water. As soon as it stops raining for weeks or months, then it all just comes down to, then forget about how big your roof is. It just comes down to how much water do I have? And if you got 200 gallons, then that's what you got to work with, and you got to stretch that for however many weeks or months you go without rain. So hopefully that's, and so in general, the general guideline is as much water storage as you can afford, go for it. You know, if you can do 1,000 gallons, if you can do 20,000 gallons, do whatever you can, because it's going to be useful to have that water. At the same time, on the other hand, anything you get is going to be helpful. 50 gallons is great, 200 gallons. Yeah, it just has to do a lot with the consumption. Hope that answered your question. I know I kind of rambled a little bit.
No, it was definitely a great answer. Munoz, if you have any further questions, feel free to share them in the chat or via the question and answer. We have a couple of open comments, but I first want to jump into a quick question that we have from Cyrus Miller. He's asking, how do I create a first flush? I know you mentioned it, but maybe doing a recap so he or she can further understand.
So Cyrus, it's basically PVC pipe. If it's a smaller roof, you can use 2-inch. If it's a, let's say smaller, say anything under 700 square feet. If it's above 700 or 800 square feet, if you're talking about 1,000, 1,500 square feet of roofing area, then you're going to want to go with a 3-inch PVC pipe. You're going to use Schedule 40. That's the heavier gauge. And like I showed in those different pictures and the diagrams, basically bringing the pipe down from the roof, and rather than going from the roof directly into the tank, you're going to take the pipe all the way down to the ground. And then you're going to put some kind of way of emptying out that pipe at the bottom. So it could either be a shutoff valve or it could be a threaded cap. That's because you're going to want to be able to empty out that water. Okay, and then at around the height of the tank, of just above the height of the tank, you're going to cut that vertical pipe and install a T pipe and a T joint, and then send that water over. I can, I'll share my screen and just quickly go back and find that slide. Well, here's one right here. Let's just use that one. Okay, so the pipe's coming down from the roof. This is all just PVC pipe, so we're just cutting and measuring and gluing, cutting, measuring, gluing. We came down this pipe at the height, not just right there at the top of the barrel, but we came up a few inches. We cut this pipe to length. We glue in this T. Like I pointed out too, it's important to put the curve in that direction. That comes over and drops into the tank. And then below that, this pipe continues going down vertical. And then down here at the bottom, you can't see in this picture, but there's going to be a shutoff valve or a threaded cap to drain it. So it's just cutting and assembling the parts. That's pretty much what you're doing. Okay.
Let's see, we have more comments and questions. We have a couple people that did share their experiences with rainwater catchment systems. It is precisely Cyrus who mentioned, I have a rainwater catchment system that was built using 2 IBC totes. I also have a lawn irrigation pump hooked to it. And
nice, that's great. Yeah, those IBC totes are really nice. And yeah, that's another thing that's pretty readily available. They're bigger than the barrels, and that's a good option. Wonder if you painted it. I'm not sure if you painted it or not, but it's a good idea to paint the plastic. Some people use elastomeric roofing sealant. It's white and reflects sunlight, and it's kind of a thick coat. So you want to paint the plastic tank itself with either regular paint or elastomeric paint, and you want to block out the UV lights. UV light coming from the sun ray, because if the sun's light's coming in, you're going to get more algae growth inside. But that's really cool. That's good to hear that you've got that, and you got a little irrigation pump. That's great. Great.
We also have Christina, who shared an interesting system. She says, we have set up barrels in the past to catch gray water from an upstairs shower. The house has a built-in cistern to catch water. We also catch roof water from farm structures and direct it into large man-made line ponds. So there's like an interesting combination of mechanisms in there, huh?
That's cool. Going into that's cheap storage. You know, you can get a backhoe or a digger and dig out like a pond, and then put a liner in it, and discharge water right into it from your roof, that's great. That's like a cheap, it's a very cheap tank. That's probably the cheapest tank you could do, is like a pond style tank. And that's really cool to hear. And just a little details, if anybody wants to copy what that person did, and they just want to make sure you put the pond liner in like on clean ground that doesn't have any sticks or anything that's going to puncture it. And then just be very careful about mosquitoes. So you're going to want to, maybe you could have fish in there to eat the mosquito larvae, or you're going to have to put maybe chlorine in it or something. I'd be interested in hearing how they're managing mosquitoes. But yeah, if you have a below ground open water pond that you're using as a water reserve, you just got to control the mosquitoes.
That's a good observation. Christina, if you're listening, if you'd like to share any practices that you're currently using for that, that'd be great. A couple more comments from Benita Martin. She's mentioning that the NRCS has a rain harvest catchment. So they do have a program, and I believe they are currently active in, at least in the USVI. So for any people in the USVI who want to reach out for additional resources out there, the Natural Resource Conservation Service provides some more information on this, and I think even some support. So definitely check that out. Thank you, Benita. That's
great. Yeah, we at our farm we installed a high tunnel. It's a 30 by 70 foot hoop house for growing vegetables in the ground, intensive vegetable production. And it included a budget for rainwater harvesting, collection, and irrigation. So that was cool. That was pretty good. You usually have to justify with NRCS that you're already doing something anyways, like we already have irrigation and it's not efficient, or there's this problem, so we need your help to do it better. Usually you have to kind of present in that way. You don't want to say, oh, we're just kind of starting from scratch. It'd be better if you say like, oh, I have this irrigation system, but it's problematic, it's unreliable, and we need help. Cool. What else, Pamela?
We have Christina, who followed up with some more suggestions, and she talked about the mosquito. So she says that she used an underlayment to protect from punctures before putting down the rubber. That's a great call. And then she talked about that at the size of 150 to 500K gallons, mosquitoes are not a problem for the ponds. So I think she has like a natural way of managing that.
That's great. Christina, that's exciting. Those are big catchment systems. That's great. 150 to 500,000 gallons. That's great. And yeah, it sounds like you got frogs and birds and everything's keeping under control. That's great.
That's a whole ecosystem right there.
So it's an irrigation pond. That's great. Nice.
So I think we don't have any more open questions or comments. Oh, I do have one about someone who built their own system after Maria. Good, nice. And they didn't have the diversion, or no, he then mentioned that the T installed. So sorry, no, I think I'm mixing it up. Where did he go?
They didn't do a first flush system.
They do into the first flush, that's it. So he got that. Good call.
Nice.
That'll help.
Great to know. All right, well, let's continue. Thank you for your questions and comments. That's really cool. And I'm excited to hear about that pond system. I think that's great. That's especially if irrigation, if you're talking about irrigation, you need so much water. It's incredible. Irrigation consumes so much water. You know, a 55-gallon barrel or even a 1,000-gallon tank, you know, it's like, wow, big, 1,000-gallon tanks. But when you get into like irrigating like a plot or a whole greenhouse, you go through so much water. So these tanks, above ground tanks, are really better for home gardens or for emergency reserves. But yeah, if you're going to irrigate for a big area, you got to look more into like a well or a pond, or like she's saying, like basically a pond with a rainwater harvesting pond. That's great. Cool. Okay, let's continue. I'm going to share my screen here again. Okay, now let's look at medium-sized cisterns without a pump. So keep it simple, gravity-fed systems. A lot of that you're gonna see is a lot of the same principles we just learned with the barrel. Gravity-fed system, no pump, but just a few things are different when you get into a bigger system. Okay, here's a couple examples here. Let's zoom in a little bit, as we've been doing. Okay, here's one we installed for a neighbor of ours. So here you can see we've got a 3-inch sanitary pipe that's been cut open and stretched over that metal roof. Okay, you can see here that we've left 4 inches of pipe that was not cut so that we can glue this elbow onto it. After the elbow, we've got a 45-degree angle coupling that brings the pipe over to the post. So remember, that's what we're going to do. We're always going to use either a 90 or a 45-degree coupling and take it over the post. We're going to attach it to the post. Here we've used metal wire and some screws. This is a nice spot to put it there, just below that T. So it comes down. Here's our first flush. We decided the height. Where do we cut this? We measured over from our tank. So first you got to get your tank raised on bricks. Look at this nice stable base. All right, we spent a few extra bucks and got enough bricks to make a nice stable base for it here. And at a height where we can fit a 5-gallon bucket or watering can below it. Okay, so we set this up and determine that height before installing the first flush. Otherwise, we wouldn't know where to put, at what height we should put that at. Okay, you can see we cut the top of this lid open, put a couple layers of screen and stapled it down. Here's the T. As somebody pointed out, this is apparently called a sanitary T in hardware stores. Drops down, and we got a little extra catchment in the first flush by putting a segment of horizontal pipe. And then here, you can't really see it, but there's a threaded cap. So after a rain event, you want to come and unscrew that threaded cap, discharge the dirty water, screw it back on, and now you're ready for the next rain. Okay. And same principle here. We've got the outlet with the shutoff valve and elbow pointing down. So it's going to have a really good flow. Difference between this and the 55-gallon barrel is that this kind of tank will usually come with some kind of threaded adapter already installed. So it's even easier to make this connection here. You're going to use Teflon, thread in and connect to it, and build off of that. So that's pretty much what we're looking at for a bigger system. All the same principles apply. Okay, now here's a little something different. We add on a couple of new elements in this system. One is we got this nice sign here showing that, this is calling people's attention. This is not potable water, right? Beware, caution. Here we got Plenitud sticker. That's our logo. That's our mandala. And okay, here's what's different though. Right in this point here, we've connected in an overflow pipe. So since this tank is in somebody's kind of garage area here, we didn't want this water to be overflowing, right? Once the tank gets full, the tank's going to reach its full capacity and just start overflowing. We didn't want that water to just start dumping all inside this driveway area and disturbing the owner. So in this case, we installed a pipe to run the water away from the area down outside of the garage area. So here we've drilled a hole. We used a hole saw here, drilled a hole, connected a tank fitting. It's a type of an adapter that threads in. We'll look at that a little bit more closely later. And then we brought the pipe over. We've got it fastened to the wall, and it's discharging that water away from the zone. Okay, so this is an overflow pipe. So this is something a little different that we did on this. Also here, we found this threaded hose adapter. And this is pretty cool because now we've got good flow rate for gravity pressure, right? We've got the shutoff valve here, nice, fast flow of water, but we've got the option of threading on a hose. So if we want to clean this area or we want to take the water a little further and get it over to a garden, we can hook on a hose right here. So those are some things that we did a little differently here that made it a little bit more efficient. Okay, yeah, we already talked about that. That's right. Okay, here's a little detail. So I'm going to show you two inlet options. So again, water comes off the roof, goes through our first flush system. Leaf diverter is optional. If you can get one, go for it. And then the pipe's going to come and go into the tank. So I'm going to show you two main options. One, this one's real cheap and easy. You cut out the hole, staple on some screen. 2 to 3 layers is important to have. In this case, the vent pipe is not required because it's not sealed. Okay, in this case, you are going to need a vent pipe. This is option 2. We've got a sealed entrance. So we've punctured a hole in the tank and we've got the pipe going directly into that. And in this case, now we're going to need that vent. And this is, you know, a little bit more tricky. This takes a little bit more skill to get the angles just right. But here, let's zoom in here and look at this closely. We drilled a big 3-inch hole here. We've got this tank fitting adapter. We come out. So the water's coming from the roof up here above. You can see the water's coming down, drops in, and goes directly into the tank. Fills up the tank. Now, at some point, that tank, when it gets full, it starts backing up inside this pipe. And we've got this elbow here set at the appropriate height. You can't really see from here because this picture is taken from below looking up. So it's changed the angle. But this water will start to overflow through this pipe before it overflows through the roof of the tank. So this is a combined inlet and overflow pipe. And what's required is you put a T in this section and you got to rotate the T in the correct angle. And you've got this 90 and a 45 degree here. So that's how you do that. A little bit tricky. Another thing, this is a good moment to point out, when you're assembling pipe, all this got glued eventually, but before we glued it, we did a dry fit of everything. In Puerto Rico, they call it like un muñeco, or you lo presentas. You present it, you put together this skeleton, you know, this mock-up without gluing everything. You make sure you got all your angles right, your cuts right. Then once you like it, you can go through and make these little marks with Sharpies on either side. So on this coupling and on the pipe, you mark it there. Get everything set up. You can number things. You can put 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever you want to do. And then you take things apart piece by piece and glue them back together and reassemble them, making sure, being careful that they all stay in the same angle and location that they're at. That little trick can save you some time and some money, because if you ever, you know, go piece by piece and you're gluing everything as you go, sometimes you realize like, oh, you made a mistake, catch your air a little bit too late, and you got to cut out the pipe and try to figure out a way to recycle it or use it for something else. So that's a little trick. Little tip. Here you can also see the vent pipe here. It comes out, goes up. It has to go above the level of the tank. Take it a good foot or so above the level of the tank, above the level of the overflow too. This has got screen in it. In this case, we just have one elbow going over horizontally. I think now in most cases we've changed this. We do another elbow pointing down. And that's got a screen embedded in there. You can actually put a couple layers of screen right on the pipe and then squeeze the coupling over it, and it pinches the screen inside there. That's what's happening here. You can't see it. Okay, so these are two different options for how to bring water into the tank. Just to go back, you got your more simple option, cut it out, screen. In that case, you want to put the pipe very close to it, you know, maybe an inch or two above. But you want to leave a little gap there where you can reach in with your hand and sweep off the leaves. That's option 1. Option 2, connected direct to the tank. You need a vent. And if you want to, you can combine the overflow. All right, so that's another little detail, a little pro trick there. Okay, this is something a lot of people don't know about too. There's 2 different ways of bringing water from your first flush system, or your first flush in the gutter area, to the tank. There's wet conveyance and dry conveyance. Dry conveyance is usually your best option, especially if you can get your tank close to the structure, close to the roof. Usually you're going to do dry conveyance. Almost everything you've seen so far has been dry conveyance. That's when the pipe's just coming right off of the first flush system and it goes straight over to the tank. Wet conveyance is a little different. That's when the pipe drops down and it goes horizontal at the base of the tank. This is usually buried underground. And then it comes back up and fills up the tank, has this vertical section of pipe. This wet conveyance, you only want to do that, or it's only necessary if, for different reasons, you've got to put your tank quite far away from your your structure. Like let's say you want to, you know, have it in a totally different area because either aesthetically you don't want to have the big tanks there, or maybe it's going to block, you know, things, or maybe you have roads and access that you don't want to block, so you have to have it on the other side of the garage, or the other side of the car entrance, or the other side of the greenhouse. So sometimes there's different reasons that might lead you to put your tanks a little further away. In that case, you want to avoid having a dry conveyance system, a pipe in the air, you know, going more than, you know, 8 feet. I'd say like 8-10 feet max. Like you don't want to go more than 8 or 10 feet, because then the pipe starts getting really heavy. You're going to have to support it. Otherwise it's going to fall on the ground and break, and a lot of things can go wrong. You know, it gets hit by a branch and breaks. So let me, you know, if we go back here a couple pictures, let's find this one here. Okay, this one is an example here. You know, there's this walkway here in front of the house. And so the owners didn't want this tank right here blocking this walkway. And over here, there's like a little raised garden bed, and it gave us a natural base to raise the tank up. So we ended up putting it here. But you can see this is a full 10 feet of horizontal pipe. So in this case, we did dry conveyance. That worked out well because down here below you had all concrete. So we didn't want to have to like have the pipe sitting on top of the concrete. And it was just, you know, just kind of within range. It's about 10 feet away. But look at how long that pipe is. You know, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. Imagine you're in a hurricane. This is all filled up with water. You know, it's going to weigh at least 25 pounds. It's getting hit with wind. You get a branch land on top of it. This could break quite easily. Okay, so anyways, in this case, we did dry conveyance. But if this is even further away, you know, imagine it's 15, it's 20, 30 feet away. This pipe is just going to get so heavy and big, and you'd have to have like posts to support it. It doesn't work out. So that's why you do wet conveyance sometimes. So I'll do a little sketch now just for a second and show you a little bit more how that works. Okay, so here we got a roof. It comes down, and we got a space. Let's say, you know, for whatever reason, there's a greenhouse here, there's a driveway, whatever, and we want to put the tanks all the way over here. Now, just point out, I don't recommend going through all this work for a 55-gallon barrel. You usually only see wet conveyance systems installed on big tanks, you know, because you got a lot more effort and money invested, and you know, for this to be worthwhile, you want to really make sure you're working on a system that's worth it. If it's just a little barrel, I mean, just find a way to tuck it in there, you know. But if this is like a 2,000-gallon tank, or you've got 2 of them, or let's say we've got 3 tanks lined up and they're each 1,500 gallons, you know, it's going to take up a bunch of space. We need to put them like 20 feet away in this other section. So we're going to go dry conveyance. Okay, so basically we come up here, we've got our gutter, we drop down, let's do a leaf diverter, why not? And it comes over the wall, and then it drops down. We've got our first flush system, like always, and comes up, okay? All that's good to go. Now, this is gonna, let's see. Oh yeah, that's a little bit more complicated, actually, first flush, the way the first flush interacts with it's a little bit more tricky, but basically you'd have to put a T in here, up here, have this drop down. There's your first flush. Then this pipe's going to go down. We're going to go underground, trench it out. We're going to run this pipe this whole length underground. Then it's going to emerge above ground, come up next to the tank, and drop in, either from the top, or we could come in directly into the side of the tank and connect in here, okay? So there's the pipe. It's coming underground. Let me do this. This is crooked. You know, I'm usually a little bit better at drawing, but I've got this electric pad, and it's like weird because I have to look at the screen and I can't see where my hand is. So it's hard. It's not like normally when you're drawing something, you're looking right at your hand drawing, but here I'm like drawing here on my lap, and I got the screen up. So forgive me. I know this is a little rough, but hopefully it's getting an idea across. So here we go. Water comes in. It starts going through here. Oh gosh. Oh gosh, I messed up this first flush detail here. First, it needs to go in the first flush. Okay, excuse me. One sec. All right, bear with me. This is gonna take a second. All right, I'm just gonna remove the wall line here so that doesn't confuse you. Okay, so it actually first goes, first pipe comes down. This first one is your first flush, okay? This is your first flush here. Then coming off there, you're gonna have this rounded T. And then that's gonna drop down and go underground, okay? Okay, now what's the water gonna do? First, water comes on the roof, comes through, screen, leaf diverter, comes straight down into our first flush section, fills this up to maximum capacity. All right, now the first flush is full. Now it spills into here. And what's it gonna do? First, it's gonna start filling up the whole bottom section of this pipe. It's gonna start filling up this whole bottom section. Some point, once that's all full, it's gonna start building up on either side evenly. It's gonna start filling up over here, filling up over here. It fills up a little more on both sides because water is always looking to find its level. And it's gonna keep doing this until it gets to the point where it discharges into our tank. Now, as long as the top of the tank, here's an important detail, the top of the tank has to be lower than this point up here where the water is coming in. Or I guess in this case with the leaf diverter, it would actually be right here. So it has to be higher. Sorry, the inlet to the tank has to be lower than the top of your pipe up here. As long as that's the case, this whole section of pipe is gonna fill up with water and it's gonna start dumping water into your tank here before overflowing up here. Okay, that's how that works. So that's a wet conveyance. Now imagine after the rain, you come along here, you open up this valve and all this water spits out and you drain the first flush. Okay, that's good. We drain the first flush. But what about all this water in here? How do we get that off? Well, that sits in there. That's why this is called a wet conveyance, because it stays wet. I mean, of course, everything's wet because it's all moving water, but this stays wet. This stays filled with water. Now, you do want to put somewhere in here a T that comes over and you've got a valve where you can periodically, it doesn't have to be every time it rains, but you could periodically drain this section of pipe. Okay, now that's a little bit more complicated. Some of you might not have really wrapped your head around that. Don't worry about it. Those of you that, already kind of understand this stuff, or if some of you are a little bit more, have that engineer kind of mentality, you probably caught on to this. Look it up. Wet conveyance, again, this is only necessary when you're working with bigger tanks and they're far away from your house or they're far away from your structure. Otherwise, you're pretty much always going to do dry conveyance. Okay, otherwise you're almost always going to use dry conveyance. There's going to be a quiz. Why wet conveyance? Why the heck do I want to go through all that complicated stuff? You only want to do that if, for different reasons and your layout, you've got to put your tanks far away. Then that's the only reason to do wet conveyance. Otherwise, skip it and don't worry about all that stuff. Keep it simple. Go dry conveyance. All right. Now we're going into bigger tanks. So you saw how these medium-sized tanks, 250 gallons, 300 gallons, you can set up a base with bricks. Pretty simple. Now when we get into bigger tanks, like 1,500 gallons, then especially when we start dealing with pumps and pressure tanks and things, things get a little bit more complicated. So I just want to point out some of the details for that. Okay, first of all, when you're moving around a big tank, you're gonna need to pick it up in a pretty big pickup truck, or sometimes the really big tanks, you even have to transport them on a flatbed truck. Okay, once you get it to the site, you gotta move it around carefully, right? This is an expensive tank. In general, big tanks like this may cost about $1 a gallon. About $1 a gallon. So a 1,500 gallon tank could cost around $1,500. So it's expensive. You want to make sure you take care of it. You move it around carefully. You unload it from the flatbed carefully. The outlet, there's like a threaded outlet on the base. Any of those pipe connections, cover them with some tape or some cardboard and protect them. If you're rolling the tank or sliding around, you want to make sure that those don't get damaged. For these bigger tanks, you're never going to see people raise these up on top of bricks. They're just too heavy and it'll be too big. So that's why these bigger tanks, they're always going to be just set right either directly on the ground or on a concrete base. But you do need to make sure the ground is level and can hold the weight. So you're going to pour a concrete floor, or in some places I've seen they'll also make a frame. They'll put bricks or something around the frame, and then they'll put gravel or sand inside and compact it. That's another option. One second.
Paulita, disculpe, ¿tú te puedes alejar un poquito más?
Okay. Sorry, my wife's on the phone. She didn't notice I was giving a class. So sorry about that. Okay, so this concrete floor, you gotta make it pretty heavy duty. If you're gonna put some big tanks on it, it should be a poured concrete floor. The rebar should be, at least on 12 by 12 inch grids, 3/8 inch in one direction, 1/2 inch in another. If you can do around the edge, if you can do like a little footer that goes down a little bit deeper, that's a good idea. Make it heavy duty. And in this case, you can see we've got 2 tanks, 1,500 gallon tanks, and they're level with each other. And so just like we saw with the barrels, these 2 tanks are filling up and they're getting consumed together. They're working together as a team. So to do that, you definitely want to make sure you have the floor even. Okay, in this system here, we've got gutters in the first flush system. We're using big 3-inch pipes. There's our first flush system coming over. Different kinds of tools you're going to use. Nice to, whenever possible, if you're doing a big project, get your tools nice and organized, set up, get a plastic table or a pallet, or clear off an area of the floor and get everything organized so you can find stuff easily. These big pipes, you got to attach them to the wall. Here I'm showing on the left 2 different options. There's these pipe brackets with the holes on either side. Those are cool, but they don't always work. They're a little bit more expensive. I really recommend this pipe hanger here, this roll of material here. You can cut it to length with some simple snippers. You can cut them and adjust them according to what's needed. On one section of the roof, you might need a 6-inch section. Somewhere else, maybe you need 8 inches. And so you can really customize them and put a Tapcom screw into a concrete, or put a wood screw, and you can really attach the heavy pipes in different ways, like you can see we're doing here. Okay, here's a little zoom in on a leaf diverter. Okay, now unfortunately, these leaf diverters, there's like a scarcity of them right now or what, I don't know, but I can't find them anywhere in Puerto Rico. I don't know if you guys can find them in the Virgin Islands or the Bahamas. I always end up having to order them off the internet. And they're kind of expensive. They're like $30, sometimes like $45 if they're not in stock and somebody's on Amazon's, raises the prices or something. They're expensive. So I just want to point out, these aren't absolutely necessary. You can also do homemade versions. Sometimes people, if you're creative, get creative, take a bucket, cut the top of it off, stretch a screen on it, staple it, find some way, put a tank fitting on the bottom or some PVC, or, there's ways of some glue. There's ways of rigging something up. So if you're creative and you want to try something like that on your own, go for it. Again, this isn't totally necessary. This is just helpful. Yeah, look at this one. I went before I did this presentation. Only thing I could find was this option here, $49.95. It's expensive, very expensive. I used to be able to find them for like $30. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why they're so expensive. Okay, so here, this is the inlet. So the water's coming into the tank. Some of these bigger tanks, they're often going to have these flat sections here. This gives you a spot where you can connect the pipe in. It's not that so if you're ever buying a big tank, you're making an investment in a big tank, try to make sure that they've got some spots like that. You don't want the whole top of the tank just to be round and domed. You want to make sure you've got a section like that. So we picked out this nice flat area. We very carefully very carefully measured here and made sure we've got a, you know, 1/2 inch on the bottom and a little space for everything to fit in. Drill this out. This is a big hole saw. You know, hold it very firmly and carefully because it can sometimes do a little kickback. And you just carefully dig it. A hole pops out. Try to make sure that that piece of PVC doesn't fall into your tank because then you're gonna have to go fish it out. That's tricky. And here's a part called a tank fitting. So it's a male threaded piece on one end. On the other end, it's got a female threaded section. Not a cap. It stays open because you want the water to be able to go in and out of it. And it comes with a rubber gasket. Sometimes I've done it where I don't use silicone. I just try to tighten it down and depend completely on the rubber gasket. Sometimes it works, sometimes it leaks. So I started to do this kind of compromise approach where on the inside of the tank, I'm only have the rubber gasket pressed down, and on the exterior of the tank, squirting a little thin bead of this silicone and then tightening it down. It just gives it a little bit more of a seal. That's not necessary, but it could help. These pieces too are a little bit specialized, expensive, kind of hard to find. For a 3 or 4 inch tank fitting, it could be like $30, $35, and they're a little bit hard to find. This is a specialty piece. Other thing we've done that's just creative and worked out is we took a male 3-inch adapter and we fed it into the hole. And then on the other side, we did a female open-ended union and we threaded in and we were able to get a pretty tight seal. And it seems like it's working out okay. We did it on the very top of the tank though in that case. And seems like it's working out. Here's a little zoom in on that part, bulkhead tank fitting. So these are, yeah, run around $30 for a 3-inch tank fitting. So this is doing the same kind of job that the Uniseal does. But Uniseals are, usually you're only gonna get a Uniseal for maybe up to 1.5, 2 inches. And if you're dealing with a big 3-inch pipe, this is usually your best option. Okay, here you can just see another detail. We've got a lot of trenches and stuff. You try to bury the pipes as much as possible. You want to label things as much as possible. What else is going on here? Well, this is interesting. We've got, let's zoom in here a little bit. These 2 pipes here, one of them is for the first flush system. This one here. Oh, no, this is interesting. So a 3-inch, this is the first flush. And it's, you can see this big horizontal section. We actually snaked this around the footer and brought it out here because we want to have a big catchment. We wanted to collect a lot of water in that first flush system. And what we've discovered is that the 3-inch shutoff valves are pretty expensive and they're hard to find. They're expensive. So what we started to do, but they're a lot more convenient. You know, if you could just pop that thing open, dump all the water out of the first flush, you know, the easier you make it, the more likely you're going to actually do that maintenance and empty out the first flush on a regular basis. Whereas the threaded cap, it takes a little bit more work. Sometimes it gets stiff and you got to get a tool, and it makes it less likely that you'll do the maintenance. But again, like I said, the 3-inch shutoff valve is expensive. So what we started to do recently is we reduced it from 3-inch to 2-inch or 1.5-inch, put a little section of pipe, and then put in a smaller shutoff valve. So a 1.5-inch or a 2-inch shutoff valve is going to be a lot more common. It's easier to find, and it's going to be a lot cheaper than a big 3-inch shutoff valve. So that's a good thing to do. And this is an overflow pipe here, side by side. So both of those are discharging on this corner. Right. Here in the same ditch, we've got this, somebody wrote Pueblo, so that's city water. So here's municipal water and rainwater gravity running side by side in the same trench. So when this is a system that's supplying water to a whole household, and we've got 2 options. If we run out of rainwater, we can close one valve and open another valve, and we can get city water in there to supply water to the house. If there's an abundance of rain, the tanks are full, we shut off the city water and we open up the rainwater pressurized rainwater system, and we can supply water to the whole household like that. So that's kind of like a dual system, kind of a cool thing to do. Another thing you can do is you can have pressurized rainwater just go to certain fixtures, like to your toilet, an outdoor sink, your washing machine. That doesn't require as much filtration. And then you can use city water going into your house for your kitchen and for your drinking water, maybe even your shower. Shower, that's kind of like a gray area, right? According to codes, you should not use unfiltered rainwater for taking a shower. Why? Because, when you're taking a shower, you might swallow a little bit of the water if you're not careful. You get it in your nostrils. Maybe you've got a cut or an injury open and it's getting water in it. So if you've got rainwater and it's not potable, it's not been filtered and purified, it could potentially get you sick if you're taking a shower with it. So according to code, you should not use rainwater for taking a shower. Some people do it anyways, right? That's kind of your own risk. Anyways, that's kind of idea. You can have, if you're hooking up your system, if you want your system to run off rainwater, there's different ways to tie it in. You can either do all one or the other. I've got rainwater, I'm filtering it, I'm going to make it potable, supply your whole household with pressurized rainwater, and you've got an option of tying in with the city if you run out of water. Or you can kind of divide functions. Okay, rainwater to the toilet and the outdoor sink and the hose for the garden and maybe the washing machine, and city water, potable city water to the shower, the bathroom sink, the kitchen sink. Those are just different options. Okay, again here, putting out, it's important to put a sign, especially if you've got kids coming around, or imagine somebody's working, cutting the grass in your yard, they go over to fill up their water bottle, drink some rainwater, get sick. So, you want to put a sign, non-potable. Here's a little place at our teaching center where we're getting rainwater for different functions. And you can see we've got two spigots side by side. The one on the right with this bronze hose fitting here. This is faucet. This is pressurized rainwater. So we hook up a hose to this and we've got pressurized rainwater ready to go for watering the garden. Just close by, there's a 20 by 40 foot greenhouse just off screen. This other option is a gravity fed system. So if the pump, here the idea is if the pump's ever not working, the pump's broken or it's getting maintenance or the power's out or whatever, there's a way that you can still get water out of the tank. You always want to make sure that if your pump goes out, you can still get some water. So that's what we've got here. Another option just for the gravity fed. And of course you can see we've got our shutoff valve, which gives us the best flow rate possible. Okay, now we're getting into some of the details for pumps and pressure tanks. Just real quick disclaimer. This is a brief introductory workshop, and I'm not going to tell you necessarily everything you need to know to be able to do this. I'm going to try to hit on as many points as I can, at least give you a basic understanding of what a pressurized rainwater system looks like and how it functions. Okay. Before I go into this, I need to drink a little water and just take a pause, see if there's any questions or comments, or at the very least, just sit here for a second.
We do have a couple of questions. Ooh, and it's looking darker out here for me. So we do have a couple of open questions. Thank you, Owen. Starting with Eliana. So Eliana is asking us, how can I determine the height of the tank and the size of the tank I would need for a house?
Sorry, how do I determine the size of the tank, or what was the question?
The height, yeah, the height and size for a house.
Okay, well, the height, if it's a system that's going to be hooked up to a pump, then it's usually goes right on the ground. It goes right on the ground because the pump is going to move it with pressure. So as far as where to locate the tank, the height that the tank is placed, yeah, if it's pressurized system, it goes right on the ground. If you're not going to have a pump and it's just going to be a gravity fed system, then you want to just raise it up on some bricks or on some kind of sturdy platform. that's at least high enough that you can get a 5-gallon bucket and a watering can below it. So that way you've got a way of getting the water, filling up something, and taking it in your house to flush the toilets or use it. So that hopefully that answers your question about the height of where to put the tank. The size of the tank really is just kind of, it comes down to budget. I mean, the more water you've got, the better in a general sense. But typically, I'd say a 1,000-gallon tank, or I'd say between 1,000 and 2 or 3,000 gallons is kind of what you're going to need to really be able to run your house off of rainwater. Even then, even with 3,000 gallons, if you go through a long dry season, and if you're using that water also for irrigation, you may run out of water. But if you're just using it for your household, there's things you can do to save water, especially if you're really counting on that rainwater as being your primary source of water. Okay, let's say a hurricane comes through, city water is not working correctly, and now you're really depending on that tank, then you can kind of go into conservation mode, right? So what does that look like? Take really quick showers. I think everybody, went through Hurricane Maria knows what that's like, right? You take quick showers. You can turn the water off, soap up, turn the water back on, take a shower. You can be more careful when you're washing dishes. Turn the water off more frequently and be careful when you're washing dishes. You can, you don't flush your toilet every time you pee. You only flush the toilet when you do number 2. You cut back on irrigation, things like that. So those are ways you can conserve water and make it stretch a little bit longer. But in general, 1,000 or 1,500 gallon tank, pressurized, is going to meet most of your needs if it's a small household. When you're getting rains on a regular basis. But if you go into like a 3 or a 4-month drought, eventually you're going to use up that whole tank. You know what I mean? Like how long can you stretch 1,000 gallons? Like, depends. Some people could probably make it last 4 months, but some people might go through that in a few weeks or a week even. So hopefully that answers your question.
That definitely, there's a lot of in there about consumption for sure.
Consumption. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have a couple more from Eliana, also Cristina. So Cristina is asking us, do you recommend tripling up the layers for all screen openings for the system, or just where the water flows in?
Okay, do you recommend tripling
up all the layers? Yeah.
So the screen openings, the one on the top is especially important because that's a bigger hole. It's going to have maybe 12, 16 inches wide. That's where you want to triple up, because also you're trying to minimize the sunlight that's going through, and you want it to be durable because it's a larger hole. It's going to have sticks and leaves hitting it and a lot of water pressure. The one like the vent pipe, that screen that you put in the vent pipe, that could probably just be 1 or 2 layers of screen. If you've got an overflow discharging and you want to try to make sure that rats don't get in it, you can put a little bit of metal wire mesh and another fine screen. So yeah, the overflow pipes, they're often 3 inches and they're at ground level discharging. So there, I'm not so much worried about a mosquito going all the way up that pipe in. I'm more worried about making sure rodents get in. And so we'll have to do two different kinds. One like a metal that's a little bit kind of heavier duty, but still lets the water through. And then another one that's like a finer mesh or metal, like metal with finer holes. The other option, like on the roof, where the water's coming on the roof, that's optional. You don't always have to put screens on your roof, but you can. It doesn't have to be 3 layers. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. We have a couple more. Does the water in the wet conveyance get stuck and get algae? Ooh, that's a good question.
The wet conveyance, so algae, my understanding is only an issue when you have sunlight. So that wet conveyance is under the ground, or the PVC pipe, the section that's above ground, It's not going to let light through it. It's a Schedule 40. So I don't think you get algae. I've never seen algae, but you do need to have a way of emptying it out. You don't have to empty it out every day or every week even, but you want to have a way of periodically emptying it out. Here next to the teaching center, we've got a wet conveyance system, and I empty it out like every couple months. Or like if I know it's going to be dry for a long time and we're not getting rains, then I'll empty it out. But yeah, I've never seen like a problem with algae really.
Eliana also asking us, when doing the dry conveyance, I wonder if the pressure of the water from the roof to go up in the tank is affected.
I wonder if she means wet conveyance. I wonder if this is more about wet conveyance, because that's often the question people have about wet conveyance, right? When the water goes down and it's under the ground and then it comes back up. People often wonder if that pressure is sufficient to go back up in the tank. It is. You know, think about a hose. Let's say we take a little hose and we fill it up with water, and you hold the hose up like this, right? Builders use hoses all the time to mark levels, right? So let's say we have a column here, another column over there, and I want to mark 2 levels. I can take a hose, fill it up with water, and if I hold this section of the hose here and the other section over there, the water eventually is going to settle down and it's going to become even and level together. Now imagine taking the hose and you do like this. Can you imagine the water in the hose just kind of like doing like this? You know, like the water is just sitting in the hose like that and not going up. Like, no, it's always going to kind of like even out and find its level. It's never just going to be suspended like that. So yeah, as long as, I know it's kind of weird. A lot of people will get confused by it. I've had so many people just sit there and stare at our wet conveyance system and just be like, how does that work? And I say like, oh, well, just as long as this is higher, you know, the entry point is higher than the tank, then it fills up and eventually the water level goes up and it spills in the tank, and they just like look at it and they don't believe it. They're like, wow, that doesn't make any sense. You know, how does that work? You know, or they're like, where's the pump? Is there a pump? You know, but it doesn't require pump. It's really straightforward physics. Yeah. As long as your entry point when it's coming off the roof is higher than the tank, it's going to work. It's got enough pressure.
Nice. Eliana was actually mentioning that, yeah, she did mean wet conveyance. So cool. Thank you, Eliana, for that question. Okay, so we have a couple more people. Keep them rolling in. Let's see. Can you repeat the specs on the concrete base rebar spacing for large tanks?
Sure, yeah, and I'll just quick disclaimer, right? If you're dealing with some really big tanks, you might want to just run this past another engineer or experienced contractor and get their take on it too. But at least I always consult friends that are engineers and stuff and go with their advice. But basically what we do is around the perimeter, we'll do a little trench, like 12 inches deep, 6 inches wide, so that the concrete pad ends up having like a lip going down into the ground on the edge like that. And you'll lay rebar in a grid pattern about 12 inches apart. And you can do it either all 1/2 inch rebar, or you can have in one direction 1/2 inch and in the opposite direction 3/8 inch rebar. That concrete pad should be at least 4 inches thick, 4 or 5 inches thick, poured concrete. And that's the minimum. The rebar, you want the rebar to be kind of in the bottom third. You don't want to have the rebar up towards the top. None of the rebar should touch the exterior in any way. The rebar should always have at least 1 inch of concrete covering around it so it doesn't get rusted. And yes, it's a little bit more work, but if you do this footer that kind of goes down below ground around the perimeter, that gives it extra strength. It also helps to make sure rodents don't burrow under your concrete pad. And down in that footer, you want to bend a rebar and have it go down into that footer. So hopefully that helps. definitely get feedback from your local engineer or experienced contractor.
I really like the explanation with the hands and all that.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid getting out that sketch pad again. That thing's like a...
Yeah, that's very handy for sure. I really like those explanations. So we have a couple more open comments rather than questions, but anyone, please feel free to share those via question and answer or the chat, wherever you feel the most comfortable. So we have a couple comments from Christina. She mentions that they leave some of the main catchment pipes unglued so they can remove them before a hurricane. That's actually a great strategy. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Owen?
I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I think I do that kind of thing also sometimes too. I think that pressurized systems always have to be glued, like after the pump. Everything that's beyond a pump, that's always got to be glued. But anything that, you know, first flush, catchment systems, all that doesn't have to get glued. You can have quite a bit of those pipes could be what we say dry fitting, just pressed together with pressure. And I think that's a cool idea. I think that's a really good solution, Christina. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, you can have kind of certain sections that you can, and they get stiff, you know, sometimes you might need to whack on them a little bit carefully with a hammer or a mallet, or bang on them with your fist and kind of get them to pop out, because over time it forms a pretty tight bond. So that's a great idea.
Thank you, Christina, for sharing that. And also she's sharing that the metal pipe connector strip with the pre-drilled holes for screws is sometimes called the plumber's tape. So if anyone is interested in getting that type of items, they know the name now, called plumber's tape.
Cool.
Thank you, Christina, for sharing that. Let's see if we have anything on our chat. So far, we have no open comments or remaining questions on our chat or our question and answer. So I don't know if anyone else has anything that they'd like to share, or we can just continue on with Owen.
Let's go. Yeah, we've got like another half hour or so. So let's get through the rest of the material.
Do it.
So here we've got we're just going to go from one side to another. We've got the rain landing on the catchment surface, leaf screen, first flush. We've got our tank. Then after the tank, we've got this whole series of pieces here that are necessary for a pressurized system. So we've got a pressure pump, a pressure tank, different kinds of filters. Sometimes you'll do at least one pre-filter before the pump. That's something that's not on the sketch, but that's a cool thing to do. And here it's got this check valve that's keeping water. Check valves only let the water go in one direction. Okay, so here's an example of a system that we did recently. This tall thing here, this is a pressure tank. Here down the bottom, you can see a couple of different kinds of sediment filters. Whoops, sediment filters down here. We'll look at those in more detail. Okay, so here's a filter before the pump. There's a little bit of pre-filtration before the pump, and then after the pump, more filters over here. So let's go part by part. Let's demystify this a little bit. Okay, so pressure tanks. Pressure tanks are really important to have in a pressurized system with a pump. And here it's good to just make sure you get one that's big enough. You know, sometimes if you have you see pumps that come with their own pressure tank, and the pressure tank's like 10 gallons or 5 gallons. In my opinion, it's just not worth it. You want to have at least, 30 gallons, 50 gallons, get a big enough pressure tank to make it worthwhile, because it's really going to do a lot to protect your pump. Okay, a pressure tank reduces the demands on the pump. What happens is it requires the pump to turn on and off less frequently. Okay, if you don't have a pressure tank, then every time you open a valve or every time you open the hose, the pump kicks on, and you don't want that. Imagine you're standing there irrigating, and you spray for a second and you stop, and you spray and you stop. Or imagine somebody's in the kitchen, you've got this going to the house, and somebody runs the sink for a second, then they close it, and they run the sink and they close it. Every time you do that, if you didn't have a pressure tank, your pump would be kicking on and off. Bzz, 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 and that reduces the life of the pump. So what you want is for the pump to kick on. It's going to have a high energy demand initially. What you want is for the pump to kick on and run for a longer period of time, and then turn off, and then have some rest period. So the pressure tank gives you a buffer. So the pump kicks on, it supplies the pressure that you need in the moment, and then the pressure tank sort of acts like almost like a savings account, right? It starts to build up a little bit of savings. So you stockpile some of this pressure in the tank and save it. Then the pump turns off. Okay, the pump turns off, and then when you start to consume water again, somebody opens a sink or somebody turns on the hose. Instead of the pump kicking on right away, it starts to use up the pressure that was stored in this pressure tank. Okay, I don't know if that explanation was a little confusing or weird. I'm sorry, I'm doing my best. But essentially, the most crucial thing to point out about it is that you have to have it. You don't have to totally understand how it works. And what it's going to do is it's going to extend the life of your pump. It's going to keep your pump from having to turn on and off constantly. And go ahead and get one that's a decent size. I'd say minimum 30 gallons. Write that down. It should be at least 30 gallons. Okay. I'm just going to go through. I'm just showing you different components that are in a pressurized system. Another important component is a pressure switch. So this will cut the power of the pump when this little chat box got in the way. Okay. It will cut the power of the pump when there is enough pressure, and then it activates the pump when the pressure goes down. Okay, so this is like a switch. So this works in collaboration with the pressure tank. This is kind of like the brain of the pressure tank. So you can set it, you can say, okay, well, the minimum pressure, I want to make sure I have at least 20 PSI and no more than 45 PSI. So you can set a range, and this pressure tank, this pressure switch will monitor, and it will allow the pump to turn on or off to keep you in that range. Why would you want that range? If you guys might be thinking like, what the heck does that even mean? Like 30 PSI, 50 PSI, what does that mean? Here's the deal. If you have too much PSI, if you've got like 70, 80, 90 pounds per square inch, if your water is really heavily pressurized, things start breaking in your kitchen. Things start leaking. The toilet starts spitting out water and leaking. More things go wrong. You don't want that much pressure. If you have too low pressure, say you have less than 20 PSI in your house or less than 25 PSI in your house, you don't have enough pressure. If somebody flushes the toilet and there's a shower running and somebody goes to wash their hands, like all of a sudden there's not enough water coming out through the line. So, you want to keep a certain range. And so the pressure switch works in collaboration with the pressure tank, okay? And those kind of like inform the pump when to turn on and when off to keep you in that range. Okay, here's a little DC pump, a little battery powered pump that we've got here. And you can see it from after the pump. We've got the pressure switch, and there's a little cable that runs from the pressure switch over to the pump. And so it's cutting off electricity or it's supplying electricity to the pump. Next to it also, I like to install a little meter just to read. This is just a good way for you to come up and look at it and see what's going on. Okay, where's your pressure at? Is your pressure switch working correctly? Okay, another important component is a float switch. So a float switch hangs down inside the tank. When you have enough water, it's flipped up and it lets electrical current go to the pump. Pump keeps working, we've got water in the tank. If the tank ever goes all the way down to the bottom and you're about to run out of water, the float switch flips down and it cuts the electrical current to the pump. So what it's doing is it's protecting the pump. It's making sure that the pump doesn't try to work without water. That would damage it very quickly. Imagine your tank's totally empty. You don't have a float switch. Your pump is just working away, trying to build you back up to 50 PSI or 40 PSI. Plugging away, but there's no water in it. It's never going to reach the PSI. So therefore, the the pressure switch isn't going to cut, the pressure switch is saying like, okay, we haven't gotten to 50 PSI yet. Keep going. Come on, pump, keep going, keep pumping. But there's no water in it. So it's going to destroy your pump. So this is very important to put a float switch. You got to be really careful that you set it the right height. So when that float ball flops down at the right height, cuts off power, and before you completely run out of water. Okay, so these are pretty cheap. You can order them on the internet, or you may be able to find them local. A little bit hard to find local, but they're around. And so this, you're going to use electrical conduit, or you might, if you've got an insulated cable, you might be able to just run it without putting it inside of a pipe. But somewhere that's going to need to go into the tank. And so that's got to go towards the top, either directly on top of the tank or really high up on the side. Okay, this is a kind of a cool filter that I've gotten to like a lot. The Rusco spin down filters. They're durable, and you can replace this whole exterior frame here is going to last a long time. You want to keep it out of the sun. Keep it out of the sun, but they've got some really good things about it. Filters out sediments. That's why we had one before the pump. Also a couple after the pump. They're really easy to maintain. So you periodically come and you open up this valve, and it's going to spit out some water, and it'll flush out some of the gunk that gets piled up in here. And then you can periodically maintain it. You can cut off the water supply, drain the water, and you unscrew it, and you can pull out this filter here and gently brush it off and clean it, with a light scrub brush, maybe a little dash of bleach or vinegar, and get it clean, and then you can put it back in there, and it lasts quite a long time. So this is a good option, and they come in different levels of filtration. You can get them for 100, 250, 500, or 1,000 microns mesh. So the lower number will only separate out bigger items. So we put, before the pump, I think I had a 250 micron mesh filter before the pump. So that's going to get out some of the bigger sediments. After the pump, we put on a 500 and then a 1,000 microns filter. So that gets out a lot of your sediments, a lot of any twigs, little sticks, leaves, algae, a lot of that stuff gets scooped up in there. That's still not going to make your water potable, but that's a good thing to put before another type of filtration system, like a carbon filter or a UV light, etc. That'll make whatever filters you have later are going to last longer because you've gotten out the big gunk. This is also important to do before going into a drip irrigation system. I'd say you probably want to use at least, I'd probably go with like a 250 or 500 microns filter before drip irrigation. Okay, so here you can see again, this is mounted on the wall. You want to protect it from the sun. And this system here, you can see afterwards we've got this larger carbon filter. Again, just to be clear, these Rusco filters do not make your water potable. They're just getting out larger sediments before you send it into another filtration system. Rainwater, if you want to drink it, you're going to need to take it through a UV light or a series of carbon filters or boil it, etc. A little bit more later on filtration. Okay, this is another kind of cool system. You can pre-filter water before it goes in the tank. I saw this summer once. It was a 2-story structure. And so they had this height advantage, and they had the water going through this layer of gravel and sand, and then it dropped down to the first story and filled up the tank. That was a really good filter. That was pretty cool. Okay, I pointed this out earlier, check valves, they come in PVC or metal, and they only allow water to go in one direction. So there's different scenarios that make that important. You want to make sure that city water, for example, doesn't get pumped back into your tank. You want to make sure your tank water doesn't go in the wrong direction. So sometimes it's important to put these in different different locations in a system. Usually they thread in. Here you can see the Teflon tape threading it in. This is another little piece that's useful. These universal key. That's a weird translation. Should say adapter. I think a universal adapter. Good thing about this is that you can disconnect a pipe without having to cut it and re-glue it. So sometimes there's an area you're gonna have to take apart periodically to maintain or to fix something. You can put one of these in there and loosen up and separate it out. Just a little thing to point out. Yeah, here's a little rig you can see. This looks a little funny because we painted this pipe at one point, and then over time the paint's wearing off. But here you can see it looks a little complicated, but you've got your pressure regulator, pressure meter. This is just so we can look at it and see what's going on. You've got the pressure switch in the back. On the left here, this is an emergency escape, emergency release. If the pressure switch stops functioning and the pump is just going and going and going, it's like it's 60 psi, and it gets to 80 psi, and it gets to 90 psi. Like if it keeps going, something might break or explode. You can get this thing here. It comes with different settings. I think this is a 60 psi escape valve. So if anything goes wrong and the pressure is really building up high, once it hits 60 psi, this will start blasting the water out to release the pressure so it doesn't go so high. So this is kind of like a little safety feature. Okay, this is this is another little detail on larger tanks with a pump. So the water that goes out, that comes out of the base of the tank, it's going into this whole pumping system. You want to think that occasionally, maybe once a year, I think I would recommend once a year, you're going to want to flush the whole tank and clean it out. And you want to have a way of draining the tank and cleaning it out without all that gunky water going through your pumping system. So it's important to install a separate drain at the bottom, separate from the pipe. And that should be at least 1.5 inches. I usually use 2 inches for a larger tank. So here we got a tank fitting, just a little stub of pipe, and then a ball valve. So we can open this up, drain out the water, get in there, scrub it around, or blast off with a pressure washer and flush all that out. So that's important to have. On a small, simple gravity-fed system that doesn't have a pump, this is not necessary. This is a system that we put into school. Hopefully this is kind of cool and inspiring to some of you guys. Check it out. We did this big mural. Got this really talented artist, Natalia Sanchez, did this big mural. And we've got this tank here that the pipe just kind of blends right in with the mural, but this is a big 3-inch pipe coming off. Drops down. We got our first flush system back here. Comes in through the top. You can see this little conduit here. This is the float switch conduit. You see that little gray pipe coming in? That's the electrical conduit for the float switch. So that comes from the tank, drops down, then goes over here to the pump. Here's our overflow. Here's the overflow. And this little housing here is for the battery and the pump and the pressure tank, and it's all enclosed here and keeps it safe and from vandalism or theft, because this school is in a public area. And you can see on the roof there's a solar panel. So this is actually a DC direct current pump that's working directly off of 12-volt battery. So this is kind of a cool option if you want to have a totally off-grid pumping system. Kind of a cool option. Here we can get in a little bit more closely and see we've got our battery, 12-volt battery getting charged by the solar panel on the roof. We've got our DC pump and big pressure tank over here. That's pretty neat, right? Sure, that'd be great. That'd be great. I'm going to pause for just 1 second, Pamela. Give me 1 minute.
Oh. So at this point, if anyone has any additional questions or comments in regards to what we have been sharing so far, please feel free. We have a couple of comments that have been shared via the chat. I thank you all for sharing all of these little hints and tips and tricks. I love how this is being a collective training and capacity building opportunity. So I thank you all for sharing all these. Let's see what we've got. So we have Etoile Pinder. He's saying that before and after filters is a good place for universal unions. So that is a great suggestion. Thank you so much. Let's see what else we got here. We have an open question. Oh, actually, let's see. So Christina is actually asking about some specs on the solar powered DC pump system at the school, and that she loved the mural.
Hey, sorry, I had to step away for a sec. Yeah, that's a cool. Let me see if we've got some more pictures on that. Again, I'm not going to be able to tell you the all the details, but here's a few more details. I think we had two. Thank you so much. We had 2 solar panels on the roof, and one 12-volt solar battery. These switches and stuff here. There's a breaker. This is just kind of standard solar gear. So I think there's a breaker for the solar panel, so you can disconnect the solar panel if required. You can interrupt the current. Breaker. What else is there? There's little charge controller. It's like a real simple charge controller. This pressure tank, I think it was 60-gallon pressure tank. Not sure. Got the pressure regulator that we featured earlier, and then here you can see the pump. This is a DC pump that I ordered off of some catalog. I can't remember which one. Granger maybe, or something like that. It's important to point out that the technology with DC pumps isn't really very well developed. There's not a lot of DC pumps. Most of them, this is actually being sold as a sprayer. This is a pump that usually people will hook up to a tank if they're going to go around and spray liquid fertilizer, herbicide, something like that. So I'll be interested to see over the years how durable this is. But it is a pretty cool option because you can just set up a really simple, cheap solar system and power it like that. But I think that's really all the specs I've got to share with you about the DC pump. Here's another pump. This is a much larger AC, so this is just running off of regular electrical current, alternating current. And this is a larger 3/4 horsepower jet pump. This was enough to power a large, irrigation system for a greenhouse, as well as supplying some of the domestic uses like outdoor sink and a washing machine and a couple of toilets. So this is a larger pump. This one I think costs maybe around $250, if I'm not mistaken. It's another little detail too. It's important to install a switch so you can turn off the pump. You can cut the electrical current that's coming from the source of electricity, down to the pump. Important little safety feature. And here I just point out this caution. I'll just say it here too. This is a 3-hour introductory workshop. I'm not actually an electrician, and I can't really tell you what to do exactly for this stuff. I would just really recommend, electricity is important. You can, if you don't do it right, you could hurt yourself. You could hurt somebody else. You could damage your pump. So if you're hooking up a pump, just make sure you either know what you're doing or you get somebody who's an experienced technician. Here's another important component that's sometimes necessary: a pressure reducing valve. So this is reduces pressure to a certain range. So sometimes, it's interesting on this system we have here, we're kicking out, we're putting out about 60 PSI coming out of this, which is what we need to distribute water around the classroom, to the toilets and the outdoor hose and sink that we have. For that, we want a good amount of pressure. Or if you're ever pumping up stairs or something, you want a good amount of pressure. But this also goes over towards a greenhouse where we have a drip irrigation system. And if you bring in too much pressure to a drip irrigation system, it's always going to be popping and breaking and leaking. Most drip irrigation systems run well with 8 to 15 PSI. only 8 to 15 PSI in a drip irrigation system, whereas in your household, you probably have 30, maybe 40 PSI. So, what do? Do you just install a really weak pump? Do you do 2 different pumps? Not usually. What you're gonna do is you're just gonna do 1 pump that meets all your needs. And if that pump is giving you too much pressure for a drip irrigation system, then you can install a pressure reducing valve like this one. Okay. Okay, we're getting close towards the end of the presentation, but just want to point out another cool option. Maybe you've seen this, Ferrocement. This is another way to build your own tank. You can customize it and pretty good size. It's basically rebar is forming like a skeleton. You've got wire mesh stretched across that. That's almost like the muscles or the skin, and then you plaster over that. And you're able to make a tank. Here's one that's 30,000 gallons. So this is a pretty cool option. But compare this to one of the participants' below ground pond that they made, rainwater harvesting pond. This is going to be a lot more expensive and a lot more work than that pond was. For that pond, all they had to do was get in there with a digger, dig it out, put down some fabric first, put down the pond liner. It was much cheaper than this. What's the difference? Something like this is a better option for like a community level potable water option. It's easier to keep this cleaner than an open pond. An open pond is going to tend to get a little bit more dirty or contaminated and require more filtration, which for irrigation is fine and it doesn't matter. But if it's for potable use, then you may want to have a large tank like this. So I'll just point that out. And real quick, this is the last section. I'm just going to go through a couple of different type of filter options. This is a Sawyer filter kit. Some of you may have seen a lot of these kind of popped up after the hurricane. Our organization redistributed, I think, about 2,000 of these tanks, 2,000 of these filters to people in our community after the hurricane. These are great to get through a quick fix. They're not so good for sustained use, but here's some pros. It's lightweight, transportable, pretty long lasting. Like the filter, it comes with a little squirt kind of nozzle where you can back flush it and get out some of the gunk. And it filters bacteria. The main point of this is if you've got water that's pretty clean, it's not been chemically contaminated, you feel like it's pretty clean, like you've got rainwater that's gone through a first flush and your roof's pretty clean, you're just worried like, oh, I hope this doesn't have like lizard poop in it, or maybe like a little bit of diluted rat pee or something. It's like, worst case scenario, you've got a tank that's pretty clean, but you're concerned it might have some bacteria. In an emergency, like after a hurricane or an earthquake or something, you can use this type of filter and pretty confident that it's going to remove the bacteria. And it's quick. What's the cons? Well, it's not going to filter out viruses, ions, heavy metals, or pesticides. Okay, so but this is a good kind of like emergency, thing. It'd be nice to have a filter like this on standby, and I would feel comfortable filtering rainwater and using it to cook with. And for drinking, if you're in a hurry, you could probably drink it. If you want to be really safe, filter it through this and then boil it. But at the very least, for cleaning, brushing your teeth, cooking with it, this is great. Okay, here's another similar option. So, you're pouring the water up top. There's a divider, filter. It drips down slowly. And then this one's cool. It's got this little nozzle here ready to go. Spigot. It's got a ceramic filtration system. So pros, this also not only bacteria, but this also removes viruses. And it also removes chlorine. So you can filter city water with it and get out some of the chlorine. Replacement filters, $15 for 1,500 liters, pretty good. Cons, filters very slowly. You like pour a gallon and a half up here, and you're going to be waiting for a couple hours before it all comes through. So it's slow, but it has a higher filtration rate. bacteria and viruses. This is kind of the Cadillac of the countertop filters. This is a Berkey filter. Sometimes you can get one factory blemished for a little bit of a better deal. These are great. These have been around for decades. They do so much testing. They publish all their records and testing, and they say that this takes out 99.9999999% of your all bacteria and viruses and everything. So this is really high quality. Like this is definitely for filtering drinking water. Like this brings it really to potable standards. I would really trust this. What's the con? It's more expensive. More expensive. You know, this is $220. This is at a discount rate. And this is kind of like a more like medium size. There's bigger one like Crown and Imperial. They get, I think, above $300. And then the filters are more expensive. You know, you're looking around $120, $80 to $120 for replacement filters. What I didn't show here is UV systems. That's another effective way in bringing water to high standard for drinking. You're always going to want to do a lot of pre-filtration before a UV system, but those are pretty trustworthy. You can often mount them inside of your kitchen, like a little cabinet or something, where they're protected, out of sun, sheltered. They require electricity. So, you know, if the power's out for an extended period of time, that filtration system wouldn't work anymore. But if you're looking to hook up an off-grid rainwater harvesting system that's going to supply water to your household, and you want to be able to consume that water, I would recommend it taking through multiple stages of filtration, and then either have a Berkey on your countertop where you've got water that's really been pre-filtered and then you're taking it through the Berkey to drink it, or setting up a UV light system. Okay, so we're pretty much nearing the end of the presentation. We already talked about this earlier. You know, our organization, we've been for the last years working with rainwater harvesting and combining workshops with social impact. So we install tanks for at-risk communities, elderly, people that live alone, at-risk populations with students. So students are learning and installing tanks. We don't have a patent on the idea. Go copy it. You guys should do this too. Try to figure out how to do this too. This is a great thing to do. Train people while benefiting and impacting your community. You know, one of the things we do at Plenitud is we just try to share good ideas, and we hope other people are going to copy us. So please, if you liked anything here, do it. Copy it. Do it too.